1,000 pumpkin smiles look down from the Halloween tree, and twice times 1,000 fresh-cut eyes glare and wink and blink as Mound Shroud leads the 8 trick-or-treaters. No, 9. But where is Pipkin? On a leaf-tossed kite flying, gliding, broomstick riding trip to learn the secret of All Hallows Eve. And they do.
Well,
asks Mound Shroud at journey's end,
which was it, a trick or a treat?
both, all agree, and so will you. It was a small town by a small river and a small lake and a small northern part of a Midwest state. There wasn't so much wilderness around that you couldn't see the town, but on the other hand, there wasn't so much town you could see and feel and touch and smell the wilderness. The town was full of trees and dry grass and dead flowers now that autumn was here, and full of fences to walk on and sidewalks to skate on, and a large ravine to tumble in and yell across. And the town was full of boys. And it was the afternoon of Halloween, and all the houses shut against the cool wind, and the town full of cold sunlight. But suddenly, the day, it was gone. Nighttime came out from under each tree and spread. Behind the doors of all the houses there was a scurry of mouse feet, muted cries, flickerings of light. Behind one door, Tom Skeleton, aged 13, stopped and listened. The wind outside nested in each tree, prowled the sidewalks in invisible treads like unseen cats. Tom Skeleton shivered. Anyone could see that the wind, this wind, was a special wind this night, and the darkness took on a special feel because it was All Hallows Eve. Everything seemed cut from soft black velvet or gold or orange velvet. Smoke panted up out of 1,000 chimneys like the plumes of funeral parades. From kitchen windows drifted 2 pumpkin smells, gourds being cut, pies being baked. The cries behind the locked house doors grew more exasperated as shadows of boys flew by windows. Half-dressed boys, grease paint on their cheeks. Here, a hunchback. There, a medium-sized giant. Attics were still being rummaged, old locks broken, old steamer chests disemboweled for costumes. Tom Skeleton had put on his bones. He grinned at the spinal cord, the rib cage, the kneecaps, stitched white on black cotton. Lucky, he thought. What a name you got, Tom Skeleton. Great for Halloween. Everyone calls you Skeleton. So, what do you wear? Bones. Wham! 8 front doors banged shut. 8 boys made a series of beautiful leaps over flower pots, rails, dead ferns, bushes, landing on their own dry, starched front lawns. Galloping and rushing, they seized a final sheet, adjusted a last mask, tugged at strange mushroom caps or wigs, shouting at the way the wind took them along. Out there running, glad of the wind, or cursing boy curses as masks fell off or hung sideways or stuffed up their noses with a muslin, smelled like a dog's hot breath, or just letting the sheer exhilaration of being alive and out this night pull their lungs and shape their throats into a yell and a yell and a yell. 8 boys collided at one intersection. One said, "Here I am." Which? Another. 8-Man and Tom Skeleton. Oh, yes, filled with pride, he said, hilarious inside his bones. Another gargoyle, and yet another, beggar, and even one, Mr. Death himself. Bang! They shook back from their conclusions, all happy fouled, and tangled under the street corner light. The swaying electric lamp belled in the wind like a cathedral bell. The bricks of the street became planks of a drunken ship, all tilted and foundered with dark and light. Behind each mask was a boy. "Who's that?" Tom Skeleton pointed. "Won't tell. Secret," cried the witch. disguising his voice. And everyone laughed. "Who's that?" "Mummy!" cried the boy inside the ancient, yellowed wrappings like an immense cigar stalking the night streets. "And who's—" "No time," said someone hidden behind yet another mystery of muslin and paint. "Trick or treat?" "Yeah!" Shrieking, wailing, full of banshee mirth, they ran on everything except sidewalks, going up into the air, over bushes and down, almost upon yipping dogs, but in the middle of running, laughing, barking, suddenly, as if a great hand of night and wind and smelling something wrong stopped them, they stopped. 6, 7, 8. "That can't be. Count again. 4, 5, 6. There should be 9 of us. Someone's missing." They sniffed each other like feral beasts. "Pipkin's not here." How did they know? They were all hidden behind masks, and yet, they could feel his absence. Pipkin! He never missed a Halloween in a zillion years. Boy, this is awful. Come on. In one vast swerve, one dog-like trot and ramble, they circled round and down the middle of the cobbled brick street, blown like leaves before a storm. "Here's the place." They pulled to a halt. There was Pipkin's house, but not enough pumpkins in the windows, not enough corn shocks on the porch, not enough spooks peering out through the dark glass in the high upstairs tower room. "Gosh," someone said, "what if Pipkin's sick? It wouldn't be Halloween without Pipkin." "Not Halloween," they moaned. And someone threw a crab apple at Pipkin's front door. It made a small thump, like a rabbit kicking the wood. They waited, sad for no reason, lost for no reason. They thought of Pipkin and a Halloween that might be a rotten pumpkin with a dead candle if Pipkin wasn't there. "Come on, Pipkin. Come out and save the night." Why were they waiting? Afraid for one small boy? Because Joe Pipkin was the greatest boy who ever lived, the grandest boy who ever fell out of a tree and laughed at the joke, the finest boy who ever raced around the track, winning, and then, seeing his friends a mile back somewhere, stumbled and fell, waited for them to catch up and joined, breast and breast, breaking the winner's tape, the jolliest boy who ever hunted out all the haunted houses in town, which are hard to find, and came back to report on them and take all the kids to ramble through the basements and scramble up the ivy outside bricks and shout down the chimneys and make water off the roots, hooting and chimpanzee dancing and ape bellowing. The day Joe Pipkin was born, all Orange Crush and knee-high soda bottles in the world fizzed over, and joyful bees swarmed countrysides to sting maiden ladies. On his birthdays, the lake pulled out from the shore in midsummer and ran back with a tidal wave of boys, a big leap of bodies, and a down crash of laughs. Dawn's lying in bed. You heard a bird peck at the window. Pipkin. You stuck your head out into the snow, water-clear summer morning. There in the dew, on the lawn, rabbit prints showed where, just a moment ago, not a dozen rabbits, but one had circled and crisscrossed in a glory of life and exultation, bounding hedges, clipping ferns, trumping clover. It resembled the switch yards down at the rail depot. A million tracks in the grass, but no, Pipkin. And here he rose up like a wild flower in the garden. His great round face burned with fresh sun. His eyes flashed Morse code signals. "Hurry up, it's almost over." "What? Today? Now? 6 a.m.? Dive down, wade in it. Or, this summer, before you know, bang, it's gone, quick." And he sank away in sunflowers that come up all onions. Pipkin, oh dear Pipkin, finest and loveliest of boys. How he ran so fast no one knew. His tennis shoes were ancient. They were colored green, a forest jogged through, brown from old harvest trudges, through September a year back, tar stained from sprints along the docks and beaches where the coal barges came in. Yellow from careless dogs, splinter-filled from climbing wood fences. His clothes were scarecrow clothes, worn by Pipkin's dogs all night, loaned to them for strolls through town, with chew marks along the cuffs and fall marks on the seat. His hair? His hair was a great hedgehog bristle of bright brown blonde daggers sticking in all directions, his ears pure peach fuzz, his hands mittened with dust and the good smell of Airedales and peppermint and stolen peaches from the far country orchards. Pipkin, an assemblage of speeds, smells, textures, a cross of all the boys who ever ran, who ever fell, got up and ran again. No one in all the years had ever seen him sitting still. He was hard to remember in school, in one seat for 1 hour. He was the last into the schoolhouse and the first exploded out when the bell ended the day. Pipkin, oh sweet Pipkin, who yodeled and played the kazoo and hated girls more than all the other boys in the gang combined. Pipkin, whose arm around your shoulder and secret whisper of great doings this day protected you from the world. Pipkin. God had got up early just to see Pipkin come out of his house, like one of those people on a weather clock, and the weather was always fine where Pipkin was. Pipkin. I stood in front of his house. Any moment now, that door would open. Pipkin would jump out in a blast of fire and smoke, and Halloween would really begin. Come on, Joe. Oh, Pipkin, they whispered, come on. The front door opened. Pippin stepped out. Not flew, not banged, not exploded. Stepped out and came down the walk to meet his friends. No running and not wearing a mask. No mask, but moving along like an old man almost.
Pipkin!
They shouted, to scare away their uneasiness. Aye, gang, said Pipkin. His face was pale. He tried to smile, but his eyes looked funny. He was holding his right side with one hand as if he had a boil there. They all looked at his hand. He took his hand away from his side. Well, he said with faint enthusiasm.
We ready to go? Yeah, but you don't look ready,
said Tom.
You sick? On Halloween?
Said Pipkin.
You kidding? Where's your costume? You go on ahead. I'll catch up. No, Pipkin, we'll wait for you to go on,
said Pipkin, saying it slowly, his face deathly pale now. His hand was back on his side.
You got a stomach ache?
Asked Tom.
You told your folks? No, I can't. They...
Tears burst from Pipkin's eyes.
It's nothing, I tell you. Look, go straight on toward the ravine. Head for the house, okay? The place of the haunts, yeah? Meet you there. You swear? Swear, wait till you see my costume.
The boys began to back off. On the way, they touched his elbow, or knocked him gently in the chest, or ran their knuckles along his chin in a fake fight.
Okay, Pipkin, as long as you're sure. I'm sure.
They took his hand away from his side. His face colored for a moment, as if the pain were gone.
On your marks, get set, go!
When Joe Pipkin said go, they went. They ran. They ran backward halfway down the block so they could see Pipkin standing there waving at them.
Hurry up, Pipkin! I'll catch you!
He shouted a long way off. The night swallowed him, and they ran. When they looked back again, he was gone. They banged doors. They shouted trick or treat, and their brown paper bags began to fill with incredible sweets. They galloped with their teeth glued shut with pink gum. They ran with red waxed lips bedazzling their faces. But all the people who met them at the doors looked like candy factory duplicates of their own mothers and fathers. It was like never leaving home. Too much kindness flashed from every window and every portal. What they wanted was to hear dragons belch in basements and banged castle doors. And so, still looking back for Pipkin, they reached the edge of town, and the place where civilization fell away in darkness, the ravine. The ravine filled with varieties of night sounds, lurkings of black ink stream and creek, lingerings of autumns that rolled over in fire and bronze and died 1,000 years ago. From this deep place sprang mushroom and toadstool and cold stone frog and crawdad and spider. There was a long tunnel down there under the earth in which poisoned waters dripped and the echoes never ceased calling, "Come, come, come, and if you do, you'll stay forever, forever, drip, forever, rustle, run, and rush, whisper, and never go, go. The boys lined up on the rim of darkness looking down, and then Tom Skeleton, cold in his bones, whistled his breath in his teeth like the wind blowing over the bedroom screen at night. He pointed.
Oh, hey! That's where Pipkin told us to go.
He vanished. All looked. They saw his small shape race down the dirt path into 100 million tons of night, all crammed in that huge dark pit. That dank cellar, that deliciously frightening ravine. Yelling, they plunged after. Where they had been was empty. The town was left behind to suffer itself with sweetness. They ran down through the ravine as a swift rush, all laughing, jostling, all elbows and ankles, all steamy snorting roustabout, to stop in collision, when Tom Skeleton stopped and pointed up the path. "There," he whispered. "There's the only house in town worth visiting on Halloween. There!" "Yeah," said everyone, for it was true. The house was special and fine and tall and dark. There must have been 1,000 windows in its sides, all shimmering with cold stars. It looked as if it had been cut out of black marble instead of built out of timbers. And inside, who could guess how many rooms, hallways, breezeways, and attics, superior and inferior attics, some higher than others, some more filled with dust and webs and ancient leaves, or gold buried above ground in the sky but lost away. So high, no ladder in town could take you there. The house beckoned with its towers, invited with its gummed-shut doors. Pirate ships are a tonic. Ancient forts are a boon, but a haunted house on All Hallows Eve? Oh, 8 small hearts beat up an absolute storm of glory and approbation. "Come on!" But they were already crowding up the path until they stood at last by a crumbling wall, looking up and still further up at the great tomb-yard top of the old house. For what's that, it seemed? The high mountain peak of the mansion was littered with what looked like black bones or iron rods, and enough chimneys to choke out smoke signals from 3 dozen fires on sooty hearths hidden far below in the dim bowels of this monster place. With so many chimneys, the roof seemed a vast cemetery, each chimney signifying a burial place of some old god or fire or enchantress of steam, smoke, and firefly spark. Even as they watched, a kind of bleak exhalation of soot breathed up out of some 4 dozen flues, darkening the sky still more and putting out some few stars. "Boy," said Tom Skeleton, "Pipkin sure knows what he's talking about. Boy," said all agreeing. They crept along a weed-infested path toward the crumbled front porch. Tom Skeleton alone itched his bony foot up on the first porch step. The others gasped at his bravery. So, now, finally in a mob, a compact mass of sweating boys moved up on the porch amid fierce cries of the planks underfoot and shudderings of their bodies. Each wished to pull back, swivel about, run, but found himself trapped against a boy behind or in front or to the side. So, with a pseudopod thrust out here or there, the amoebic form, the large perspiration of boys, leaned and made a run and a stop to the front door of the house, which was as tall as a coffin and twice as thin. They stood there for a long moment, various hands reaching out like the legs of an immense spider as if to twist that cold knob or reach up for the knocker on that front door. Meanwhile, the wooden floorings of the porch sank and wallowed beneath their weight, threatening at every shift of proportion to give way and fling them into some cockroach abyss beneath. The planks each turned to an A or an F or a C, sang out their uncanny music as heavy shoes scraped on them, and if there had been time, and it were noon, they might have danced out a cadaver's tune or a skeleton's rigadoon. For who can resist an ancient porch like a gigantic xylophone only wants to be jumped on to make music? But they were not thinking this. Henry Hank Smith, for that's who it was, hidden inside Black Witch's costume, cried,
Look!
And all looked at the knocker on the door. Tom's hand trembled out to touch it.
A Marley knocker. What?
You know, Scrooge and Marley, A Christmas Carol,
whispered Tom. And indeed, the face that made up the knocker on the door was the face of a man with a dread toothache, his jaw bandaged, his hair askew, his teeth prolapsed, his eyes wild, dead as a Dornell Marley, friend to Scrooge, inhabitor of lands beyond the grave, doomed to wander this earth forever until... Knock, said Henry Hank. Tom Skeleton took hold of old Marley's cold and grizzled jaw, lifted it, and let it fall. All jumped at the concussion. The entire house shook, its bones ground together, shapes snapped, furled up so that windows blinked wide their ghastly eyes. Tom Skeleton cat-leaped to the porch rails, staring up. On the rooftop, weird weathercocks spun, two-headed roosters whirled in the sneezed wind. A gargoyle on the western rim of the house erupted. Twin snorts of rain funneled dust, and down the long, snaking serpentine rain spouts of the house after the sneeze had died and the weathercock ceased spinning. Vagrant wisps of autumn leaf and cobweb fell gusting out onto the dark grass. Tom whirled to look at the faintly shuddering windows. Moonlit reflections trembled in the glass like schools of disturbed silver minnows. Then the front door gave a shake, a twist of its knob, a grimace of its Marley knocker, and flung itself wide. The wind made by the suddenly opening door almost knocked the boys off the porch. They seized one another's elbows, yelling. Then the darkness within the house inhaled. A wind sucked through the gaping door. It pulled at the boys, dragging them across the porch. They had to lean back so as not to be snatched into the deep, dark hallway. They struggled, shouted, clutched the porch rails. But then the wind ceased. Darkness moved within darkness. Inside the house, a long way off, someone was walking towards the door. Whoever it was must have been dressed in all black, for they could see nothing but a pale white face drifting on the air. An evil smile came and hung in the doorway before them. Behind the smile, the tall man hid in shadow. They could see his eyes now, small pinpoints of green fire and little charred pits of sockets looking out at them.
Well,
said Tom.
trick or Treat?
Trick, said the smile in the dark. Treat?
Yes, sir.
The wind played a flute in a chimney somewhere, an old song about time and dark and far places. The tall man shut up his smile like a bright pocket knife.
No treats.
He said.
Only trick.
The doors slammed. The house thundered with showers of dust. Dust puffed out the rain spout again in fluffs like an emergence of downy cats. Dust gasped from open windows. Dust snorted from the porch boards under their feet. The boys stared at the locked, shut-fast front door. The Marley knocker was not scowling now, but smiling an evil smile.
What's he mean?
Asked Tom.
No treats. Only trick?
Backing off around the side of the house, they were astonished at the sounds it made. A whole rigmarole of whispers, squeaks, creaks, wails, and murmurs, and the night wind was careful to let the boys hear them. With every step they took, the great house leaned after them with soft groans. They rounded the far side of the house and stopped, for there was a tree, and it was such a tree as they had never seen in all their lives. It stood in the middle of a vast yard behind the terribly strange house, and this tree rose up some 100 feet in the air, taller than the high roofs, and full and round and well-branched, and covered all with rich assortments of red and brown and yellow autumn leaves.
But,
Whispered Tom.
oh, look. What's up in that tree?
For the tree was hung with a variety of pumpkins of every shape and size, and a number of tints and hues of smoky yellow and bright orange.
A pumpkin tree?
Someone said.
No,
said Tom. The wind blew among the high branches and tossed their bright burden softly.
A Halloween tree,
said Tom. And he was right. The pumpkins on the tree were not pumpkins. Each had a face sliced in it. Each face was different. Every eye was a stranger eye. Every nose was a weirdo nose. Every mouth smiled hideously in some new way. There must have been 1,000 pumpkins on this tree, hung high and on every branch. 1,000 miles, 1,000 grimaces, and twice times 1,000 glares and winks and blinks and leerings of fresh-cut eyes. And as the boys watched, a new thing happened. The pumpkins began to come alive, one by one, starting at the bottom of the tree, and the nearest pumpkin's candles took fire within the raw interiors. This one, and then that, and this, and then still another, and on up and around 3 pumpkins here, 7 pumpkins still higher, a dozen clustered beyond, 100, 500. 1,000 pumpkins lit their candles, which is to say, brightened up their faces, showed fire in their square or round or curiously slanted eyes, flame guttered in their toothed mouths. Sparks leapt out their ripe-cut ears, and from somewhere 2 voices, 3 or maybe 4 voices whispered and chanted a kind of sing-song or old sea shanty of the sky and time and the earth turning over into sleep. The rain-spouts blew spider dust.
It's big, it's broad.
A voice smoked from the rooftop chimney.
It's broad, it's bright. It fills the sky of All Hallows Night.
From open windows somewhere, cobwebs drifted.
The strangest sight you've ever seen. The monster tree on Halloween.
The candles flickered and flared. The wind crooned in. The wind crooned out. The pumpkin mouths tuning the song.
The leaves have burned to gold and red. The grass is brown, the old year dead. But hang the harvest high, oh see the candle constellations on the Halloween tree.
Tom felt his mouth stir like a small mouse wanting to sing.
The stars they turn, the candles burn, and the mouse leaves scurry on the cold wind borne. And a mob of smiles shine down on thee from the gourds hung high on the Halloween tree. The smile of the witch and the smile of the cat, the smile of the beast, the smile of the bat, the smile of the reaper taking his fee, all cut and glimmer on the Halloween tree.
Smoke seemed to sift from Tom's mouth.
Halloween tree,
All the boys whispered it.
Halloween tree.
And then there was silence, and during the silence the last of the triples and quadruples of All Hallows Tree candles were lit in titanic constellations, woven up through the black branches and peeking down through the twigs and crisp leaves, and the tree had now become one vast, substantial smile. The last of the pumpkins now were lit. The air around the tree was Indian summer breathing warm. The tree exhaled sooty smoke and raw pumpkin smell upon them.
Gosh,
said Tom Skeleton.
hey, what kind of place is this?
Asked Henry Hank, the witch.
I mean, first the house. That man had no treats, only tricks. And now, I never saw a tree like this in my life. Like a Christmas tree, only bigger, and all those candles and pumpkin. What's it mean? What's it celebrate?
Celebrate, a vast voice whispered somewhere, perhaps in a chimney, or perhaps all the windows of the house opened like mouths at the same moment behind them, sliding up, sliding down, announcing the word celebrate, with breathings out of darkness. Yes, said the gigantic whisper, which trembled the candles in the pumpkins. Celebration. The boys leaped around, but the house was still. The windows were closed and brimmed with pools of moonlight.
Last one in's an old maid,
cried Tom suddenly, and a barn of leaves lay waiting like fires, old gold. And the boys ran and dived at the huge, lovely pile of autumn treasure, and in the moment of diving, about to vanish beneath the leaves in crisp swarms, yelling, shouting, shoving, falling, there was an immense gulp of breath, a seizing in of air. The boys yelped, pulled back as if an invisible whip had struck them. For coming up out of the pile of leaves was a bony white hand, all by itself, and following it, all smiles, hidden one moment, but now revealed as it slid upward with a white skull. And what had been a delicious pool of oak and elm and poplar leaves to thrash and sink and hide in now became the last place on all this world the boys wanted to be. For the white bony hand was flying in the air, and the white skull rose to hover before them, and the boys fell back, colliding, sneezing out their air in panics, until in one wild mass they fell flat upon the earth and writhed and tore at the grass to fight free, scramble, try to run.
Help!
They cried.
Oh, yes. Help,
said the skull. Then peal after peal of laughter froze them further as the hand upon the air, the bony skeleton hand, reached up, took hold of the white skull face, and peeled it down and off. The boys blinked once behind their masks. Their jaws dropped, though none could see them dropping. The huge man in dark clothes soared up out of the leaves, taller and yet taller. He grew like a tree. He put out branches that were his hands. He stood formed against the Halloween tree itself, his outstretched arms and long, bony white fingers festooned with orange globes of fire and burning smiles. His eyes were pressed tight as he roared his laughter. His mouth gaped wide to let an autumn wind rush out.
No treat, boys. No, not treat. Trick, boys, trick!
They lay there waiting for the earthquake to come, and it came. The tall man's laughter took hold of the ground and gave it a shake. This tremor passed through their bones, came out their mouths, and it came out in a form of still more laughter. They sat up amid the ruins of the thrashed-about leaf pile, surprised. They put their hands to their masks to feel the hot air leaping out in small gusts of echoing mirth. Then they looked up at the man, as if to verify their surprise.
Yes, boys, that was a trick. You'd forgotten? No, you never knew.
He leaned against the tree, finishing out his fists of happiness, shaking the trunk, making the 1,000 pumpkins shiver in the fires inside to smoke and dance. Warmed by their laughter, the boys got up to feel their bones and see if anything was broken. Nothing was. They stood in a small mob underneath the Halloween tree, waiting, for they knew this was only the beginning of something new, and special, and grand and fine.
Well,
Said Tom Skeleton.
Well, Tom,
Said the man.
Tom,
Cried everyone else.
is that you?
Tom in the skeleton mask stiffened.
or is it Bob or Fred? No, that must be Ralph.
Said the man quickly.
All of those.
Sighed Tom, clapping his mask hard in place, relieved.
Yeah, all.
Said everyone. The man nodded, smiling.
Well, now. Now you know something about Halloween you never knew before. How did you like my trick?
Trick. Yes, trick.
The boys were catching fire with the idea. It made all the good glue go out of their joints and put a little dust of sin in their blood. They felt it stir around until it plumped on up to light their eyes and stretch their lips to show their happy dog teeth.
Yeah, sure. Is that what you used to do on Halloween?
Asked the witch boy.
This and more. But let me introduce myself. Mound Shroud is the name. Carapace Clavicle Mound Shroud. Does that have a ring, boys? Does it sound for you?
It sounds, the boys thought. Oh, it sounds. Mound Shroud,
A fine name.
said Mr. Mound Shroud, giving it a full sepulchral night church sound.
And a fine night. And all the deep, dark, wild, long history of Halloween waiting to swallow us whole.
Swallow us?
Yes! Cried Mound Shroud. Lads, look at yourselves. Why are you, boy, wearing that skull face? And you, boy, carrying a scythe? And you, lad, made up like a witch? And you!
He thrust his bony finger at each mask.
You don't know, do you? You just put on those faces and old mothball clothes and jump out. But you don't really know, do you?
Well,
Said Tom, a mouse behind his skull-white muslin.
no. Yeah,
Said the devil boy.
come to think of it, why am I wearing this?
He pointed a finger at his red cloak and sharp rubber horns and lovely pitchfork.
And me this.
Said the ghost, trailing its long white graveyard sheets, and all the boys were given to wonder and touched their own costumes and refit their own masks.
Then wouldn't it be fun for you to find out?
Asked Mr. Mound Shroud.
I'll tell you. No, better yet, I'll show you. If only there was time.
It's only 6:30. Halloween hasn't even begun.
Said Tom in his cold bones.
True, boy.
Said Mr. Mound Shroud.
All right, lads. Come along, then.
He strode. They ran. At the edge of the deep, dark night ravine, he pointed over the rim of the hills and the earth, away from the light of the moon, under the dim light of strange stars, The wind fluttered his black cloak in the hood that half shadowed and now half revealed his almost fleshless face.
There. Do you see it, lads?
What?
The undiscovered country out there. Look long, look deep, make a feast. The past, boys, oh, the past. It's dark, yes, and full of nightmare. Everything that Halloween ever was lies buried there. Will you dig for bones, boys? Do you have the stuff?
He burned his gaze into them.
What is Halloween? How did it start? Where? Why? What for? Witches, cats, mummy dust haunts. It's all there in that country from which no one returns. Will you dive into the dark ocean, boys? Will you fly in the dark sky?
The boys swallowed hard. Someone peeped.
We'd like to, but Pipkin. We gotta wait for Pipkin. Yeah, Pipkin sent us to your place. We couldn't go without him.
As if summoned in an instant, they heard a cry from the far side of the ravine.
Hey, here I am,
called a frail voice. They saw his small figure standing with the lit pumpkin on the far ravine ledge.
This way,
they yelled.
Pipkin, quick! Coming!
Was the cry.
I don't feel so good, but I had to come. Wait for me.
They saw his small figure run down the middle of the ravine on the path.
Oh, wait. Please wait.
The voice began to fail.
I don't feel well. I can't run. Can't. Pipkin!
Everyone shouted, waving from the edge of the cliff. His figure was small. There were shadows mixed everywhere. Bats flew and owls shrieked. Night ravines clustered like black leaves in trees. The small boy, running with his lit pumpkin, fell. Oh, gasped Mountain Shroud. The pumpkin light went out.
Oh, no,
gasped everyone.
Light your pumpkin, Pip. Light it,
shrieked Tom. He thought he saw the small figure scrambling in the dark grass below, trying to strike a light, but in that instant of darkness, the night swept in. A great wing folded over the abyss, and then the owls hooted. Many mice scampered and slithered in the shadows. 1,000,000 tiny murders happened somewhere.
Light your pumpkin, Pip. Help!
Wailed his sad voice. 1,000 wings flew away. A great beast beat the air somewhere like a thumping drum. The clouds, like gauzy scenes, were pulled away to set a clean sky. The moon was there, a great eye. It looked down upon an empty path. Pipkin, nowhere to be seen. Way off toward the horizon, something dark frittered and danced and slithered away in the cold star air.
Help! Help!
Wailed the fading voice. Then it was gone.
Oh,
mourned Mr. Mountain Shroud.
This is bad. I fear something has taken him away.
Where? Where?
Gibbered the boys cold.
To the undiscovered country. The place I wanted to show you, but now...
You don't mean that thing in the ravine, or him, or whatever that something was. Was it death? Did he grab Pipkin and run?
Borrowed, more like it. Perhaps to hold him for ransom,
said Mountain Shroud.
Can death do that?
Sometimes, yes.
Oh, gosh.
Tom felt his eyes water.
Pip, tonight running slow, so pale. Pip, you shouldn't have come out.
He shouted at the sky, but there was only wind there, and white clouds floating like old spirit fluff, and a clear river of wind. They stood cold, shivering. They looked off to where the dark something had stolen their friend.
So,
said Mountain Shroud,
all the more reason for you to come along, lads. If we fly fast, maybe we can catch Pipkin and grab his sweet Halloween corn candy soul, bring him back, pop him in bed, toast him warm, save his breath. What say, lads? Would you solve 2 mysteries in one? Search and seek for lost Pipkin, and solve Halloween, all in one fell dark blow.
They thought of All Hallows Night, and a billion ghosts are wandering the lonely lanes and cold winds and strange smokes. They thought of Pipkin, no more than a thimbleful of boy in sheer summer delight, torn out like a tooth and carried off on a black tide of web and horn and black soot, and almost as one, they murmured.
Yes.
Mountrout sprang. He ran. He pummeled, he pushed, and he raved.
Quick now! Along this path, up the rise, along the road, the abandoned farm, over the fence. Alley-oop!
They leapt the fence, running, and stood by a barn that was frosted over with old circus posters, with banners tattered by wind, pasted here 30, 40, 50 years back. Circuses passing through had left patches and swatches of themselves 10 inches thick.
A kite, boys! Build a kite, quick!
No sooner had he cried this than Mr. Mountrout ripped a great tissue from the side of the barn. It fluttered in his hands. The eye of a tiger, another rip from another ancient poster, and the mouth of a lion. The boys heard tons of Africa down the wind. They blinked, they ran. They scratched with fingernails, they plucked with hands, they seized off strips and patches and huge rolls of animal flesh, of fang and piercing eye, of wounded flank, of blood-red claw, of tail, of bound and leap and cry. The whole side of the barn was an ancient parade stopped dead. They tore it asunder, and with each tear they pulled off talon, tongue, and ravening feline eye. Beneath waited layer upon layer of jungle nightmare, delicious encounters with polar bears, panicked zebra, milling prides of lions, charging rhinos, clambering gorillas, which pawed up the side of midnight and swung towards dawn. 1,000 animals in congregation rumbled to be set free, now free in fists and hands and fingers, whistling in the autumn wind. The boys raced off across the grass. Yes, they did. Now Mountrout knocked down old fence railing beams and made a rough kite cross and bound them with wire, then stood back to receive the gifts of kite paper as the boys flung them in fistfuls. And these he tossed in place upon the frame, and spark flinting, fused with burnings of his horny hands.
Hey!
The boys cried their delight.
Oh, look!
They had never seen such things, or known that men such as Mountrout, with a pinch, a clutch, a pressure of fingers might blend an eye with tooth, a tooth with mouth, a mouth with feline bobcat tail, all mingled beautifully in a single thing. A wild jigsaw-puzzled jungle zoo billowed and trapped, pasted and tied, growing, taking color and sound and pattern in the light of the ascending moon. Now another cannibal eye, now another hungry maw, a mad chimpanzee, a most insane mandrill ape, a screaming butcher bird. The boys ran up with the last frights handed over, and the kite finished, the ancient flesh laid out, fused by the still blue smoke burning horny hands. Mr. Mountrout lit a cigar with the last bit of fire that sparked out of his thumb, and smiled, and the light from his smile showed the kite for what it was, a kite of destructions, of animals so dire and fierce their outcry drowned the wind and murdered the heart. He was pleased. The boys were pleased. For the kite somehow seemed to resemble.
Why?
Said Tom, astounded.
A pterodactyl.
A what?
Pterodactyl. Those ancient flying reptiles gone some billion years back and never seen again,
replied Mr. Mountrout.
Well,
said Boy,
pterodactyl it seems it is, and 'twill fly us downwind to perdition or land's end or some other fine-sounding place. But now, rope, twine, string, quick, filch and carry.
They ran the rope off an abandoned clothesline, strung between barn and abandoned farmhouse. A good 90 feet or more of rope they brought Mountrout, who snaked it through his fists until it smoked a most unholy smoke. He tied it to the middle of the vast kite, which flapped like a somehow lost and out-of-water manta ray upon this high, strange beach. It struggled with wind to live. It flapped and floundered on the heaves of tidal air, lay down on grass. Mount Shroud stood back, gave a jerk, and lo! The kite flew. It hung low upon the air at the end of its clothesline, in a dumb brute groveling of wind, veering this way, dashing that, leaping up suddenly to confront them with a wall of eyes, a solid flesh of teeth, a storm of cries.
It won't rise. It won't go straight. A tail. We need a tail.
And as by instinct, Tom dived first and seized the kite by its bottom. He hung there. The kite steadied. It began to rise.
Yes,
cried the dark man.
oh, lad, you are the one, bright boy. You be the tail, and more and more.
And as the kite slowly ascended the cold river of swift-flowing air, each boy in turn, seized with the whim, spurred by his wits, became more and yet more of the tail. Which is to say that Henry Hank, disguised as a witch, grabbed Tom's ankles, and now the kite had two boys for its magnificent tail, and Ralph Bankstrom, wound up in his mummy clothes, stumbling over his winding tapes, smothered in his burial rags, shambled forward, jumped, and grabbed Henry Hank's ankles. So three boys hung now in a tail.
Wait, here I come.
Cried Beggar, who under his dirt and rags was really Fred Fryer. He jumped, he caught. The kite ascended. The four boys making the tail yelled for more length. They got it when the boy dressed as an ape-man scrambled and grabbed ankles, followed by the boy dressed as Death, with a scythe who did dangerously likewise.
Watch out with the scythe.
The scythe fell and lay in the grass like a lost smile. But the two boys hung down from all the half-washed ankles, and the kite rose more, higher, higher, adding a boy and a boy and a boy, until, with a yell and shout, 8 boys were down hung in a magnificent thrashing tail, the last two being Ghost, who was truly George Smith, and Wally Babb, who had, inspired, made himself up to look like a gargoyle fallen off the top of a cathedral. The boys yelled with elation. The kite swooped and took off.
Hey!
Whoosh, whoosh, the kite purred with 1,000 animal whispers. Whang, the kite rope strummed the wind. Hush, said the entire thing, and the wind flew them high across the stars, leaving Mount Shroud to look up with awe at his contraption, his kite, his boys.
Wait! Don't wait, come on!
The boys yelled. Mount Shroud ran along the grass to seize the scythe. His cape fluttered, taking air, making wings until he also, very simply, took off and soared. The kite flew. The boys hung down from the kite in a fine lizard's tail, now weaving, now looping, now snapping, now gliding. They yelled with delight. They shrieked with outgasped terror. They rode across the moon in an exclamation point. They soared over hills and meadows and farms. They saw themselves reflected in dusky moon-bright streams, creeks, and rivers. They brushed down over ancient trees. The wind stirred by their passing, shook down whole government mints of coins, leaves, bright showering to the black-grassed earth. They flew over the town and thought,
Oh, look up, see! Here we are, your sons!
And thought, oh, look down. There, somewhere, are our mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, teachers. Hey, here we are. Oh, someone see us, or you'll never believe. And in a last swoop the kite whistled, hummed, drummed along the winds to float over the old house and the Halloween tree, where first they had met Mount Shroud. Swoop, flutter, glide, rush, hiss. The suction of their swung bodies caused 1,000 candles to flutter, flicker, stutter their light, hiss with desire to reflame themselves, so all the hung pumpkin scowls and leers and wild smiles were half snuffed to unhappy shadows. The whole tree went dead for a heartbeat. Then, as the kite sang high, the tree blazed up with 1,000 new-cut pumpkin frowns, glares, grimaces, and grins. The windows of the house, black mirrors, saw the kite go away and away until the boys and the kite and Mr. Mounshroud were very small on the horizon. And then down they sailed off away, deep into the undiscovered country of old death and strange years in the frightful past.
Where are we going?
Cried Tom, hanging to the kite's tail.
Yes, where? Where?
Cried all the boys, one after another, below. Not where, but when, said Mounshroud, pacing them, his great veiled cloak full of moon wind and time. 2,000. Count them, years before Christ. Pipkin's there, waiting. I smell it. Fly! Then the moon began to blink. It closed up its eye, and there was darkness. Then faster and faster it began to wink, to wax, to wane, to wax again, until 1,000 times over it flickered, and in flickering changed the landscape below. And then 50,000 times. So fast they could not see it. The moon extinguished itself, and relit itself, and the moon stopped winking, and held very still, and the land was changed. Look, said Mounshroud. Hung upon the very air above them, and the million tiger, lion, leopard, panther eyes of the autumn kite looked down, as did the eyes of the boys, and the sun rose, showing them Egypt, the river Nile, the Sphinx, and the pyramids. But, said Mounshroud, notice anything different?
Why,
Gasped Tom.
it's all new. It's just been built. That means we really have gone back in time 4,000 years.
And sure enough, the Egypt that lay below was ancient sand, but new-cut stone. The Sphinx, with its great lion paws treaded out on the golden stuffs of desert, was sharp-cut and freshly born out of the womb of stone mountains. It was a vast pup in the bright and empty glare of noon. If the sun had fallen and lay between its paws, it would have cuffed it like a fireball toy. The pyramids? Why, they lay like strange-shaped blocks, yet other games to be puzzled over, played with by the woman-lion Sphinx. The kite zoomed down and skirted the sand dunes, floated over one pyramid, and was drawn as by suction by an open tomb mouth set in a small cliff. Hey, presto! Cried Mounshroud. With a flap, he gave the kite such a kick as made the boys toll like clamorous bells.
Hey, no!
They cried. The kite shuddered, fell down, hovered 10 feet above the dunes, and shook itself like a wild dog ridding itself of fleas. The boys fell safe in golden sand. The kite broke away in 1,000 shreds of eyes, fangs, shrieks, roars, elephant trumpetings. The Egyptian tomb mouth sucked them in, and Mounshroud laughing with it.
Mounshroud, wait!
Leaping up, the boys ran to shout into the dark tomb doorway. Then they lifted their gaze and saw where they were. The Valley of the Kings, where huge stone gods loomed above. Dust sifted in a strange downpour of tears from their eyes, tears made of sand and powdered rock. The boys leaned into the shadows like a dry river bottom. The corridors led down to deep vaults, where lay the linen-wrapped dead. Dust fountains echoed and played in strange courtyards a mile below. The boys ached. Listening, the tomb breathed out a sick exhalation of paprika, cinnamon, and powdered camel dung. Somewhere, a mummy dreamed, coughed in its sleep, unraveled the bandage, twitched its dusty tongue, and turned over for another 1,000-year snooze.
Mr. Mounshroud?
Called Tom Skeleton, and from deep in the dry earth a lost voice whispered, Mounshroud. Out of the darkness something rolled, rushed, flapped. A long strip of mummy cloth snapped out in the sunlight. It was as if the very tomb itself had stuck out its old dry tongue which lay at their feet. The boys stared. The linen stripe was hundreds of yards long, and might, if they wished, let them down into the mysterious deeps below the Egyptian earth. Tom's skeleton, trembling, put one toe out to touch the yellow linen strip. A wind blew from the tomb, saying, "Yes."
Here I go,
said Tom, and balancing on the tightrope of linen, he wandered down and vanished in the dark under the burial chambers. "Yes," whispered the wind coming from below. "All of you come next and next and another and another, quick." The boys raced down the linen path in darkness.
"Watch for murder, boys! Murder!"
The pillars on both sides of the rushing boys flashed to life. Pictures shivered and moved. The golden sun was on every pillar, but it was a sun with arms and legs bound tight with mummy wrappings.
"Murder!"
A dark creature struck the sun. One dreadful blow. The sun died. Its fires went out. The boys ran blind in darkness.
Yeah,
thought Tom. Running, sure. I think every night the sun dies. Going to sleep, I wonder, will it come back? Tomorrow morning, will it still be dead? The boys ran on new pillars dead ahead. The sun appeared again, burning out the eclipse.
"Swell,"
thought Tom.
"That's it! Sunrise!"
But just as quickly, the sun was murdered again. On each pillar they raced by, the sun died in autumn and was buried in cold winter. Middle of December, thought Tom. I often think the sun will never come back. Winter will go on forever. This time the sun is really dead. But as the boys slowed at the end of the long corridor, the sun was reborn. Spring arrived with golden horns. Light filled the corridor with pure fire. The strange god stood burning on every wall, his face a grand fire of triumph, wrapped in gold ribbons.
"Why, heck, I know who that is,"
panted Henry Hank.
"Saw him in a movie once, with terrible Egyptian mummies. Osiris,"
said Tom.
Yes,
hissed Mountain Shroud's voice from the deep tombs.
Lesson number 1 about Halloween. Osiris, son of the earth and sky, killed each night by his brother Darkness. Osiris, slain by autumn, murdered by his own night blood. So it goes in every country. Each has its death festival, having to do with seasons, skulls and bones, boys, skeletons and ghosts. In Egypt, lads, see the death of Osiris, king of the dead. Gaze long.
The boys gazed, for they had come to a vast hole in the underground cavern, and through this hole they could look out at an Egyptian village where, at dusk, food was being placed out in pottery and copper dishes on porches and sills.
For homecoming ghosts,
whispered Mountain Shroud somewhere in the shadows. Rows of oil lamps were nailed to house fronts, and the soft smoke from these rose up on the twilight air like wandering spirits. You could almost see the haunts shifting along the cobbled streets. The shadows leaned away from the lost sun in the west and tried to enter the houses, but the warm food steaming on the porches kept the shadows circling and stirring. A faint smell of incense and mummy dust wafted up to the boys who looked out upon this ancient Halloween, and the treats being set forth, not for wandering boys, but homeless ghosts.
"Hey!"
Do not lose your way in the dark. Voices sang in the houses to harps and lutes. Oh dear sweet dad, come home and welcome here. Lost in the dark, but always dear. Do not wander, do not roam. Dear ones, come home. Smoke curled from the dim lamps, and the shadows stepped up on the porches and very gently touched the gifts of food. And in one house, they could see an old grandfather mummy being taken out of a closet and put in the place of honor at the head of the table, with food set before him, and the members of the family sat down to their evening meal and lifted their glasses and drank to the dead one seated there, all dust and dry silence.
Quick now, come find me.
Mountraud's voice, laughing, called them on.
This way. No, this. This.
They ran along the slender ribbon of mummy wrapping, deep into the earth.
Yes, here I am.
They turned a corner and stopped, for the long linen ribbon wound across the tomb floor and up a wall to wrap around the feet of an ancient brown mummy, which propped a tilt and a candlelit niche.
Stuttered
Ralph Bengstrom, dressed in his own mummy costume.
Is that a real mummy?
Yes. Dust sifted from under the golden mask on the mummy's face.
Real.
Mr. Mountraud, you?
The gold mask fell to clang like a bright bell on the floor. Where the mask had been was the mummy's face, a pool of brown mud crinkled by blasts of sun. One eye was glued shut with spiderweb. The other eye cracked forth tears of dust and glinted of bright blue glass. Is there some boy there dressed like a mummy? Asked the voice, muffled beneath the shroud.
Why, me, sir.
Squeaked Ralph, showing his arms, legs, chest, and the medical bandages it had taken him all afternoon to wrap himself up in, mummified. Ah, good, said Mountraud.
Grab the linen strip. Pull!
Ralph bent, took one of the ancient mummy's bandages, and yanked. The ribbon unraveled up around, to reveal the great ancient reptile nose, beak and flaky chin, and dry, smiling dust, powdery mouth of Mountraud. His crossed arms fell loose.
Thanks, lad. Free. No fun being wrapped like some old funeral gift for the land of the dead. But hist. Quick, boys. Hop in the niches. Stand stiff. Someone's coming. Play mummies, boys. Play dead.
The boys leapt to stand, arms folded, eyes shut, breaths held like a frieze of small mummies cut in the ancient rock.
Easy,
whispered Mountraud.
Here comes.
A funeral procession. An army of mourners in gold and fine silks, bearing small sailing ship toys and copper bowls of food in their hands. And in their midst, a mummy case carried light as sunshine on the shoulders of 6 men. And behind that, a fresh-wrapped mummy with new paintings on its linen vestments and a small gold mask fitted over the hidden face.
See the food, boys? The toys,
whispered Mountraud.
They put toys in the tombs, lads, so the gods will come play, romp, roust about, and run children happy to the land of the dead. See the boats, kites, jump ropes, toy knives.
But look at the size of that mummy,
said Ralph, inside his hot linen bandages.
It's a 12-year-old boy in there, like me. And that gold mask on the boy mummy's face, doesn't it look familiar? Pipkin!
Cried everyone hoarsely. Shh! Hissed Mountraud, for the funeral had stopped. The high priests were glancing around through the flickering torch shadows. The boys high in their niches squeezed their eyes shut, sucked in their breaths. Not a whisper, said Mountraud, a mosquito in Tom's ear. Not a murmur. The harp music began again. The funeral shuffled on, and in the midst of all the gold and toys, the kites of the dead, there was the small 12-year-old new mummy with a gold mask that looked just exactly like Pipkin.
No,
thought Tom.
Yes,
cried a mouse voice, tiny, lost, wrapped away, kept trapped, wild.
It's me. I'm here under the mask, under the wrappings. I can't move, can't yell, can't bite free. Pipkin,
thought Tom.
Wait! Can't help it! Trapped!
Shouted the small, wee voice, wrapped in picture linens.
Follow! Meet me! Find me at...
The voice faded, for the funeral procession had turned a corner in the dark labyrinth and was gone.
Follow you where, Pipkin?
Tom Skeleton jumped down from his niche and yelled in the dark.
Meet you where?
But at that exact moment, Mound Shroud, like a chopped tree, fell out of his niche. He struck the floor. "Wait!" he cautioned Tom, looking up at him with one eye that looked like a spider caught in its own web. "We'll save old Pipkin yet. Slide does it. Slide and creep, boys. Tssst." They helped him up and unwound some of his mummy wrappings and tiptoed down the long corridor and turned the corner.
Holy cow.
Whispered Tom.
Look, they're putting Pipkin's mummy in the coffin and the coffin inside the
sarcophagus. Mound Shroud supplied the jaw cracker. A coffin, in a coffin, in a coffin, lad. Each larger than the last. All done up in hieroglyphs to tell his life story.
Pipkin's life?
Said all. Or whoever Pipkin was this time around this year, 4,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Whispered Ralph.
Look at the pictures on the sides of the coffin. Pipkin was 1 year old. Pipkin 5, Pipkin 10 and running fast, Pipkin up an apple tree, Pipkin pretending to drown in the lake, Pipkin eating his way through a peach orchard. Wait, what's that?
Mound Shroud watched the busy funeral. They're putting furniture in the tomb for him to use in the land of the dead. Boats, kites, tops to spin. Fresh fruits should Pipkin wake 100 years from now hungry.
Oh, he'll be hungry, all right. Good grief. Look, they're going out. They're closing the tomb.
Mound Shroud had to grab and hold Tom, for he was jumping up and down in agony.
Pipkin's in there. Pipkin's in there, though. He's buried. When do we save him?
Later. The night is young. We'll see Pipkin again. Never fear. Then. The tomb door slammed shut. The boys yammered and yelled. In the dark they could hear the scrape and slosh of mortar filling the last cracks and seams as the final stones were shoved into place. The mourners went away with their silent harps. Ralph stood in his mummy costume, stunned, watching the last shadows go.
Is that why I'm dressed like a mummy?
He fingered his bandages. He touched his clay-wrinkled ancient face.
Is that what my part of Halloween is all about?
Oh, boy. Oh, murmured Mound Shroud. The Egyptians. Why, they built to last. 10,000 years they planned for. Tombs, boys, tombs. Graves, mummies, bones. Death. Death was at the very heart, gizzard, light, soul, and body of their life. Tombs and more tombs with secret passages so none might be found, so grave robbers could not borrow souls and toys and gold. You are a mummy, boy, because that was how they dressed for eternity. Spun up in a cocoon of threads, they hoped to come forth like lovely butterflies in some far, dear, loving world. Know your cocoon, boy. Touch the strange stuffs.
Why?
Said Ralph the mummy, blinking at the smoky walls and old hieroglyphs.
Every day is Halloween to them. Every day?
Gasped all in admiration.
Every day was Halloween for them, too.
Mound Shroud pointed. The boys turned. A kind of green electric storm simmered in the tomb dungeon. The ground shuddered as with an ancient earthquake. Somewhere, a volcano turned over in its sleep, lighting the walls with one fiery shoulder. And on the walls beyond were prehistoric drawings of cavemen, long before the Egyptians. Now, said Mound Shroud. Lightning struck. Saber-toothed tigers caught the cavemen screaming. Tar pits drowned their bones. They sank, wailing.
Wait, let's save a few with fire.
Mound Shroud blinked. Lightning struck to burn forests. One ape-man, running, seized a burning branch and rammed it into the saber-toothed jaws. The tiger shrieked and fell away. The ape-man, snorting in triumph, tossed the fiery branch into a pile of autumn leaves in his cave. Other men came to hold their hands out to the fire, laughing at the night, where the yellow beast eyes waited, afraid. See, boys? Mound Shroud's face flickered with the fire. The days of the long cold are done. Because of this one brave, new-thinking man. Summer
lives in the winter cave,
But
said Tom.
what's that got to do with Halloween?
Why, blast my bones, everything. When you and your friends die every day, there's no time to think of death, is there? Only time to run. But when you stop running at long last.
He touched the walls. The 8 men froze in mid-flight.
Now you have time to think of where you came from, where you're going, and fire lights the way, boys. Fire and lightning, morning stars to gaze at. Fire in your own cave to protect you. Only by night fires was the caveman, beast man, at last able to turn his thoughts on a spit and baste them with wonder. The sun died in the sky. Winter came on like a great white beast shaking its fur, burying him. Would spring ever come back to the world? Would the sun be reborn next year or stay murdered? Egyptians asked it. Cavemen asked it 1,000,000 years before. Will the sun rise tomorrow morning?
And that's how Halloween began?
With such long thoughts at night, boys. And always at the center of it, fire. The sun dying down the cold sky forever. How that must have scared early man, huh? That this big death, that was the big death. If the sun went away forever, then what? So in the middle of autumn, every dying, 8 men turned in their sleep, remembered their own dead of the last year. Ghosts called in their heads, memories. That's what ghosts are. But 8 men didn't know that. Behind their eyelids, late nights, the memory ghosts called, waved, danced. So 8 men woke up, tossed twigs on the fire, shivered, wept. They could drive away wolves, but not memories, not ghosts. So they held tight to their ribs, prayed for spring, watched the fire, thanked invisible gods for harvest of fruit and nuts. Halloween indeed, 1,000,000 years ago, in a cave in autumn, with ghosts inside heads and the sun lost.
Mount Shroud's voice faded. He unraveled another yard or two of mummy wrappings, draped them over his arm grandly, and said,
More to see. Come on, boys.
And they walked out of the catacombs into the twilight of an old Egyptian day. A great pyramid lay before them, waiting.
Last one to the top, said Mount Shroud, is a monkey's uncle.
And the monkey's uncle was Tom. Gasping, they reached the pyramid's top, where waited a vast crystal lens, a viewing glass which spun slowly in the wind on a golden tripod, a gigantic eye with which to bring far places near. In the west, the sun, smothered in dying in clouds, sank. Mount Shroud hooted his delight.
There it goes, boys. The heart, the soul, the flesh of Halloween. The sun. There Osiris is being murdered. There sinks Mithras, the Persian fire. There falls Phobos, Apollo, all Grecian light. Sun and flame, boys. Look, and blink. Turn the crystal spyglass, swing it down the Mediterranean coast 1,000 miles. See the Greek Isles?
Sure,
said plain George Smith, dressed up as a fancy pale ghost.
cities, towns, streets, houses, people jumping out on porches to bring food.
Yes, Mount Shroud beamed. Their festival of the dead. The Feast of Pots. Trick or treat, old style. But tricks from the dead if you don't feed them. So treats are laid out in fine banquets on the sill.
Far away in the sweet dusk, smells of cooked meat steamed. Dishes were dealt out for spirits that smoked across the land of the living. The women and children of the Grecian homes came and went with multitudinous quantities of spiced and delectable victuals. Then, all through the Grecian Isles, doors slammed. The fast slamming echoed along the dark wind.
The temples shutting tight, said Mount Shroud. Every holy place in Greece will be double-locked this night.
And look!
Ralph, who was a mummy, swung the crystal lens. The light flared over the boys' masks.
Those people, why are they painting black molasses on their front doorposts?
Pitch,
corrected Mounshroud.
black tar to glue the ghosts. Stick them fast so they can't get inside.
Why?
Said Tom.
Didn't we think of that?
Darkness moved down the Mediterranean shores. From the tombs, like mist, the dead spirits wavered in soot in black plumes along the streets to be caught in the dark tar that smeared the porch sills. The wind mourned as if telling the anguish of the trapped dead.
Now Italy, Rome.
Mounshroud turned the lens to see Roman cemeteries where people placed food on graves and hurried off. The wind whipped Mounshroud's cape. It hollowed his mouth.
Oh, autumn winds that bake and burn, and all the world to darkness stern, now storm and seize and make of me a swarm of leaves from autumn's tree.
He kick-jumped straight up in the air. The boys yelled in delight, even as his clothes, cape, hair, skin, body, corn candy bones tore apart before their eyes.
Leaves burn, change turn.
The wind ribboned him into confetti. 1,000,000 autumn leaves, gold, brown, red as blood, rust, all wild, rustling, simmering. A clutch of oak and maple leaf, a hickory leaf downfall, a toss of flaking whisper murmur, rustle to the dark River Creek sky. Not one kite, but 10,000 tiny mummy flake kites. Mounshroud exploded apart.
World turn, leaves burn, grass die, trees fly.
And from the billion other trees in autumn lands, leaves rushed to join with the upflung battalions of dry bits that were Mounshroud, dispersed in whirlwinds from which his voice stormed.
Boys, see the fires along the Mediterranean coast? Fires burning north through Europe. Fires of fear, flames of celebration. Would you spy, boys? Up now, fly!
And the leaves in avalanche fell upon each boy like terrible flapping moths and carried them away. Over Egyptian sands they sang and laughed and giggled. Over the strange sea, rapturous and hysterical they soared.
Happy New Year!
A voice cried from below.
Happy what?
Asked Tom.
Happy New Year!
Mounshroud, a flock of rusty leaves, rustled his voice.
In old times, the 1st of November was New Year's Day. The true end of summer. The cold start of winter. Not exactly happy, but, well, Happy New Year!
They crossed Europe and saw new water below.
The British Isles,
whispered Mounshroud.
Would you cock an eye at England's own druid god of the dead?
We would!
Quiet as milkweed then, soft as snow. Fall, blow away down, each and all.
The boys fell like a bushel of chestnuts. Their feet rained to earth. Now the boys who landed like a downpour of bright autumn trash were in this order. Tom Skeleton, dressed up in his delicious bones. Henry Hank, more or less a witch. Ralph Bangstrom, an unraveled mummy, becoming more unbandaged by the minute. A ghost named George Smith. JJ, no other name needed, a very fine ape-man. Wally Babb, who said he was a gargoyle, but everyone said he looked more like Quasimodo. Fred Fryer, what else but a beggar fresh out of a ditch? And last but not least, Hackles, Nibley, who ran up a costume at the last moment by simply clamping on a white scare mask and grabbing his grandpa's harvest scythe off the garage wall. All the boys being safely landed on English earth. Their billion autumn leaves fell off and blew away. They stood in the midst of a vast field of wheat.
Here, Master Nibley, I brought your scythe. Take it, Grab, now lie low, warned Mounshroud, the druid god of the dead. Samhain, fall.
They fell, for a huge scythe came skimming down out of the sky. With its great razor edge it cut the wind. With its whistling side of sliced clouds, it beheaded trees. It razored along the cheek of the hill. It made a clean shave of wheat. In the air, a whole blizzard of wheat fell. And with every whisk, every cut, every scythe, the sky was aswarm with cries and shrieks and screams. The scythe hissed up. The boys cowered.
Huh,
grunted a large voice.
Mr. Mounshroud, is that you?
Cried Tom, from towering 40 feet above them in the sky, an immense scythe in his hands, was this cowled figure, his face in midnight fogs. The blade swung down. Hiss!
Mr. Mounshroud, let us be!
Shut up!
Someone knocked Tom's elbow. Mr. Mounshroud lay on the earth beside him.
Shut up! That's not me. That's...
Samhain! Cried the voice in the fog. God of the dead, I harvest thus, and so. Swoosh! All those who died this year are here, and for their sins this night are turned to beasts. Another massive swoom of his scythe.
Please,
whimpered Ralph the mummy. The scythe zippered Hackle's nibbly spine, ripping his costume in a long tear, knocking his own small scythe free of his hands. Beasts! And the harvest wheat flailed up, spun around in the wind, shrieking its souls. All those who had died in the past 12 months rained to earth, and falling, touching the heads of wheat were turned to asses, chickens, snakes, which scurried, cackled, brayed. They were turned to dogs and cats and cows that barked, cried, bawled, but all were miniature. All were tiny, small, no bigger than worms, no bigger than toes, no bigger than a sliced-off tip of a nose. By the hundreds and thousands the wheat heads snowed up in scatters and fell down as spiders, which could not shout or beg or weep for mercy, but which, soundless, raced over the grass, poured over the boys. 100 centipedes tiptoed on Ralph's spine. 200 leeches clung to Hackle's nibbly scythe, until, with a nightmare gasp, he raved and shook them off. Everywhere fell black widows and tiny boa constrictors. For your sins, take that and this, bellowed the voice in the whistling sky. The scythe flashed, the wind caught, fell in bright thunders. The wheat churned and gave up 1,000,000 heads. Heads fell, sinners hit like rocks, and, hitting, were turned to frogs and toads, and multitudes of scaly warts with legs and jellyfish which stank in the night.
I'll be good,
prayed Tom.
Let me live,
added Henry Hank. All of this said very loudly, for the scythe was making a dreadful roar. It was like an ocean wave falling down out of the sky, cleaning a beach and running away up to cut more clouds. Even the clouds seemed to be whispering out swift and more fervent prayers for their own fates. Not me, not me. For all the evil you ever did, said Samhain, and the scythe cut and the souls were harvested and fell in blind newts and awful bedbugs and dreadful cockroaches to scuttle, limp, creep, and scrabble.
My gosh, he's a bug maker, flea squasher, snake grinder outer, roach transformer, fly creeper. No, Samhain, October god, god of the dead.
Samhain stomped a great foot which tread 1,000 bugs in the grass, trampled 10,000 tiny soul beasts in the dust.
I think,
said Tom.
It's time we ran?
Suggested Ralph, not offhand.
Shall we take a vote?
The scythe hissed. Samhain boomed. Vote, heck, said Mounshroud. All jumped. You there! Thundered the voice above them. Come back!
No, sir, thanks.
Said one and then another, and put right foot after left.
I figure.
Said Ralph, panting, leaping, tears on his cheeks.
I've been pretty good most of my life. I don't deserve to die.
Ha ha! Shouted Sam Hain. The scythe came in a guillotine which chunked the head off an oak tree and felled a maple. A whole orchard of autumn apples fell into a marble pit somewhere. It sounded like a house full of boys running downstairs.
I don't think he heard you, Ralph,
said Tom. They dived. They fell among rocks and shrubs. The scythe ricocheted off the stones. Sam Hain gave such a yell as brought an avalanche down a small hill nearby.
Boy,
said Ralph, squinched up, balled up, feet against chest, eyes tight.
England is no place to be a sinner.
Even as a final rain, a shower, a downpour of hysterical souls turned beetle, turned flea, turned stink bug, turned daddy longlegs scurried over the boys.
Hey, look! That dog!
A wild dog, mad with terror, raced up the rocks, and its face, its eyes, something in its eyes.
That couldn't be... Pipkin?
Said everyone.
Pip!
Shouted Tom.
Is this where we meet you?
But whom? The scythe fell, and yipping with fright the dog bowled over, slid down the grass.
Hold on, Pipkin! We know you, we see you! Don't scare off, don't...
Tom whistled, but the dog, yapping with Pipkin's own dear sweet sacred voice, was gone. But didn't an echo of his yip come back from the hills? Meet, 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 me.
Where?
Thought Tom ruminantly.
Where?
Sam Hain, scythe uplifted, gazed all about, happy at his games. He chuckled a most delicious chuckle, spat fiery spittle on his horny hands, clenched the scythe tighter, swung it up, and froze. For somewhere, someone was singing. Somewhere near the top of a hill, in a small clump of trees, a small bonfire flickered. Men like shadows were gathered there, lifting up their arms and chanting. Sam Hain listened, his scythe like a great smile in his arms.
O Sam Hain, God of the dead, hear us, we the holy druid priests in this grove of trees, the great oaks, plead for the souls of the dead.
Far away these strange men by their bright fire lifted metal knives, lifted cats and goats in their heads, chanting.
We pray for the souls of those who are turned to beasts. O God of death, we sacrifice these beasts so that you will let free the souls of our loved ones who died this year.
The knives flashed. Sam Hain smiled an even greater smile. The animals shrieked. All around the boys on the earth, the grass, the rocks, the trapped souls lost in spiders, locked in roaches, put away in fleas and pillbugs and centipedes, gaped and yammered silent yammers and twitched and roiled. Tom winced. He thought he heard a million small, oh, very microscopic bleats of pain and release from around him where the centipedes capered, spiders danced.
Let free, let be,
prayed the druids on the hill. The fire blazed. The sea wind roared over the meadows, brushed the rocks, touched at the spiders, rolled the pillbugs, tumbled the roaches. The tiny spiders, insects, the miniature dogs and cows fluffed away like a million snowflakes. The tiny souls trapped in insect bodies dissolved. Released with a vast cavern whisper, they whistled up the sky. To heaven! Cried the druid priests.
Oh, free, go!
They flew. They vanished in the air with a great sigh of thanks and much gratitude. Sam Hain, God of the dead, shrugged and let them go. Then, just as suddenly, he stiffened as did the hidden boys and Mr. Moundshroud, crouched in the rocks. Through a valley and across the hill ran an army of Roman soldiers, a troop on the double. Their leader ran before them, shouting,
Soldiers of Rome, destroy the pagans, destroy the unholy religion. Suetonius so orders.
For Suetonius!
Samhain in the sky raised his scythe too late. The soldiers slammed swords and axes into the bases of the holy druid oaks. Samhain shrieked in pain as if the axes had chopped his knees. The holy trees groaned, whistled, and, with a final chop, thundered to earth. Samhain trembled in the high air. The druid priests, fleeing, stopped and shuddered. Trees fell. The priests chopped at the ankles, the knees fell. They were blown over like oaks in a hurricane.
No!
Roared Samhain in the high air.
But yes!
Cried the Romans.
Now!
The soldiers gave a final mighty blow, and Samhain, god of the dead, torn at his roots, chopped at his ankles, began to fall. The boys, staring up, leaped out of the way, for it was like a giant forest falling all in one fall. They were shadowed by his midnight descent. The thunder of his death came before him. He was the greatest tree in all existence ever, the tallest oak to ever plummet down and die. Down he came through the wild air, screaming, flailing to hold himself up. Samhain hit the earth. He dropped with a roar that shook the bones of the hills and snuffed the holy fires. And with Samhain cut down and dead, the last of the druid oaks fell with him, like wheat cut with a final scythe, his own huge scythe. A vast smile, lost in the fields, dissolved into a puddle of silver and sank into the grass. Silence, a smoldering of fires, a blowing of leaves. Instantly, the sun went down. The druid priests bled in the grass as the boys watched, and the Roman captain prowled the dead fires, kicking the holy ashes.
Here, we shall build our temple to our gods.
The soldiers lit new fires and burned incense before golden idols which they set in place. But no sooner lit than a star shone in the east, on fair desert sands, to camel bells. 3 wise men moved. The Roman soldiers lifted their bronze shields against the glare of the star in the sky, but their shields melted. The Roman idols melted and became shapes of Mary and her son. The soldiers' armor melted, dripped, changed. They were dressed now in the garments of priests who sang Latin for yet newer altars, even as Moundshroud crouched, squinting, weighed the scene, and whispered it to his small masked friends.
Aye, boys, see? Gods following gods. The Romans cut the druids, their oaks, their god of the dead, bang, down, and put in their own gods, eh? Now the Christians run and cut the Romans down. New altars, boys, new incense, new names.
The wind blew the altar candles out. In darkness Tom cried out. The earth shuddered and spun. Rain drenched them.
What's happening, Mr. Moundshroud? Where are we?
Moundshroud struck a flinty thumb into fire and held it up.
Why, bless me, boys. It's the Dark Ages. The longest, darkest night ever. Christ long since came and gone in the world, and
Where's Pipkin? Here!
Cried a voice from the black sky.
I think I'm on a broom. It's taking me away.
There was a huge whisper like a gigantic cat stroking its whiskers in the dark.
Brooms,
muttered Moundshroud.
the gathering of brooms, the October Broom Festival, the annual migration.
But to where?
Asked Tom, calling up, for everyone was making traffic on the air now in whisking shrieks.
The broom works? Of course! Help! Help, I'm flying!
Said Henry Hank. Whisk! A broom whistled him away. A great brambly cat flashed by Tom's cheek. He felt a wooden pole between his legs jump up.
Hang on!
said Moundshroud.
When attacked by a broom, only one thing to do. Hold tight.
I'm holding,
cried Tom, and flew away. The sky was swept clean with brooms. The sky was yelled clean by boys occupying at least 8 of those brooms at once. And what with changing their cries of fear to cries of delight, the boys almost forgot to look or listen for Pipkin, similarly sailed off among island clouds.
this way,
Announced Pipkin,
as quick as we can.
said Tom Skeleton.
But, Pip, it's awful hard to ride a broomstick, I find. Funny you say that.
Said Henry Hank.
I agree.
Everyone agreed, falling off, hanging on, and climbing back. There was now such a hustle of brooms as left no room for clouds, and none for mist, and certainly none for fog or boys. There was an immense traffic jam of brooms, as if all Earth's forests gave up their branches in one boom and fling, and scouring autumn fields, cut clean and throttled tight such cereal grains as made good sweepers, thrashers, beaters, then flew up. So here came all the backyard wash line prop poles in the world, and here came with them swatches of grass, clumps of weed, brambles of bush to herd the sheep clouds and cleanse the stars and ride the boys. Said boys, each on his own skinny mount, were deluged with beatings and cuffings of flail and wood. They were punished severely for occupying heaven. They took 100 bruises each, 12 cuts, and precisely 49 lumps on their tender skulls.
Hey, I got a bloody nose,
Gasped Tom, happily looking at the red on his fingers.
Shucks,
Cried Pipkin, going into a cloud dry and coming out wet.
that's nothing. I got one eye shut, one ear bad, and a lost tooth. Pipkin,
Called Tom.
don't keep telling us to meet you and then we don't know where. Where? In the air,
Said Pipkin.
Cheese.
Muttered Henry Hank.
There's 2 zillion, 100 billion, 99 million acres of air wrapped around the world. Which half acre does Pip mean? I mean,
Gasped Pipkin, but a whole bundle of broomsticks banged up in an akimbo dance like a shuttle of cornstalks across his flight, or a farmland finch suddenly come, antic and in frenzies. A cloud with a grand fiend face gaped its mouth. It swallowed Pipkin, broom and all, then shut its vapors tight and rumbled with Pipkin indigestion.
kick your way out, Pipkin. Stomp in his stomach.
Someone suggested, but nothing kicked, and the cloud, satisfied, sailed on Forever's Bay toward eternity's dawn, ruminating over its delicious sweet boy dinner.
Meet him in the air.
Tom snorted.
Good grief, talk about horrible directions to nowhere.
See even more horrible directions,
Said Moundshroud, sailing by on a broom that looked like a wet and angry cat on the end of a mop.
Would you see witches, boys? Hags, crones, conjure wives, magicians, black magics, demons, and devils. There they be, in mobs, in riots, boys. Skin your eyeballs.
And there below, all across Europe, through France and Germany and Spain, on the night roads were indeed clusters and mobs and parades of strange sinners running north, scrambling away from the southern sea.
That's it. Jump, run! This way to the night, this way to the dark.
Moundshroud swooped low, shouting over the mobs like a general leading a fine, evil troop.
Quick, hide! Lie low, wait for a few centuries.
Hide from what?
Wondered Tom.
Here come the Christians!
Yelled voices below on the roads, and that was the answer. Tom blinked and soared and watched, and from all the roads the mobs ran to stand alone on farms or at crossroads in harvest fields and towns. Old men, old women, toothless and raving, yelling to the sky as the broom swept down.
Why?
Said Henry Hank, stunned.
Those are witches!
Well, dry clean my clothes and hang them out to dry if you're not right, boy.
Agreed Moundshroud.
There are witches jumping fires,
Said J.J.
and witches stirring cauldrons.
Said Tom.
And witches drawing symbols in farmyard dust,
said Ralph.
Are they real? I mean, I always thought.
Real? Mound Shroud, insulted, almost fell from his bramble-cat broom.
Ye little gods and fishes, lad, every town has its resident witch. Every town hides some old Greek pagan priest, some Roman worshipper of tiny gods who ran up the roads, hid in culverts, sank in caves to escape the Christians. In every tiny village, boy, in every scrubby farm, the old religions hide out. You saw the Druids cut and chopped, eh? They hid from the Romans, and now the Romans, who fed Christians to lions, run themselves to hide. So all the little lollygagging cults, all favors and types, scramble to survive. See how they run, boys!
And it was true. Fires burned all over Europe. At every crossroad and every haystack, dark forms jumped in cats across flames. Cauldrons bubbled, old hags cursed, dogs frolicked red-hot coals.
Witches everywhere,
said Tom, amazed.
I never knew there were so many.
Mobs and multitudes, Tom. Europe was flooded to the dikes, witches underfoot, under bed, in cellars and high attics.
Boy, oh boy,
said Henry Yank, proud in his witch costume.
Real witches. Could they talk to the dead?
No, said Mound Shroud.
Jump up devils?
No.
Keep demons in door hinges and squeal them out at midnight?
No.
Ride broomsticks?
Nope.
Put sneezing spells on people?
Sorry.
Kill folks by sticking pins in dolls?
No.
Well, heck, what could they do?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Cried all the boys affronted. Oh, they thought they could, boys. Mound Shroud led the team down on their brooms over the farms where witches dropped frogs in cauldrons and stomped toads and snuffed mummy dust and cavorted in cackles. But stop and think. What does the word witch truly mean?
Why,
said Tom, and was stymied. Wits, said Mound Shroud. Intelligence, that's all it means. Knowledge. So any man or woman with half a brain and with inclinations toward learning had his wits about him, eh? And so anyone too smart who didn't watch out was called a witch, said everyone. And some of the smart ones, the ones with wits, pretended at magic, or dreamed themselves with ghosts and dead shufflers and ambling mummies. And if enemies dropped dead by coincidence, they took credit for it. They liked to believe they had power, but they had none, boys. None. Sad and sorry, 'tis true. But listen, there beyond the hill, that's where the brooms come from. That's where they go. The boys listened and heard. The broom makes the broom that looms on sky and gloom and rising of the moon. That broom witch, groom to witch, flies high on harvesting of storm-wind grass, with shriek and sigh to motion it. In ocean seas of cloud, now soft, now loud. Below, at half-tilt, a witch broom factory was filled with commotions, poles being cut, abound with broom bushes which, no sooner tied, took off up chimneys in flights of spark. On rooftops, hags leaped on to ride the stars, or so it seemed, as the boys watched the voices saying. Did witches feel the night wind in their bed, and reel and dance with devils and the dead? No! But that is what they bragged and claimed and said, until whole continents, hell-bent, named witches of the innocent, and did conspire to burn old women, babes, and virgins in a fire. Mobs raved through villages and farms with torches, cursing. Bonfires flared from the English Channel to the Mediterranean Sea. Through all of Germany and France, 10,000 so-called evil witches hung to kick their final antic dance,
No village but what shared a dread uproar, as each side named the other for a devil's pig. Old Satan so the demons maddened bore.
Wild pigs with witches glued to their backs trotted roof tiles, flinting sparks, snorting steams.
All Europe was a cloud of witches' smoke, their judges often bound and burnt with them. For what? A joke! Until all men are spoiled with guilt, all sin, all lie. So, what to do? Why, everyone must die.
Smoke churned the sky. At every crossroads, witches hung, crows gathered in a feathered darkness. The boys hung from their brooms in the sky, eyes popped, mouths wide.
Anyone want to be a witch?
Asked Mounshroud at last. Said Henry Hank, shivering in his witch's rags.
Not me.
No fun, eh, boy?
No fun.
The brooms flew them off through chars and smokes. They landed on an empty street, in an open place. In Paris, the brooms fell over dead.
Well now, boys, what should we do to scare the scarers, frighten the frighteners, shiver the shiverers?
Called Mounshroud inside of a cloud.
What's bigger than demons and witches?
Bigger gods? Bigger witches? Bigger churches?
Guessed Tom Skeleton.
Bless you, Tom. Right. An idea gets big, yes? A religion gets big. How? With buildings large enough to cast shadows across an entire land. Build buildings you can see for 100 miles. Build one so tall and famous it has a hunchback and it's ringing bells. So now, boys, help me build it brick by brick, flying buttress by flying buttress. Let's build.
Notre Dame!
Shouted 8 boys. And all the more reason to build Notre Dame because, Mounshroud said,
listen.
A bell tolled in the sky.
Help!
Whispered a voice when the sound had died. The boys looked and saw a kind of scaffolding reared up in half a belfry keep upon the moon. At the very top hung a huge bronze bell that was tolling now. And from inside that bell, with every crash and bang and gong, this small voice shouted,
Help!
The boys looked at Mounshroud. Their eyes blazed a question. Pipkin?
Meet me in the air.
Thought Tom.
And there he is.
There, hung upside down over Paris, his head for a knocker, was Pipkin in a bell, or the shadow, ghost, or lost spirit of Pipkin anyway. Which is to say, there was a bell, and when it sounded the hour, why, that sound was made by a flesh-and-blood clapper, which knocked the rim. Pipkin's head banged the bell. And again.
Knock his brains out.
Gasped Henry Hank.
Help!
Called Pipkin, a shadow in the bell, a ghost chained upside down to strike the quarters and the hours.
Fly!
Cried the boys to their brooms, but their brooms lay dead on the Paris stones.
No life in them,
mourned Mounshroud.
Juice, sap, and fire all gone. Well now,
He rubbed his chin to Sparks.
How do we get up to help Pipkin with no brooms?
You fly, Mr. Mounshroud.
Ah, no, that's not the ticket. You must save him, always and forever, again and again, this night until one grand salvation. Wait. Ah! Inspiration! We were going to build the Notre Dame, correct? Well then, let us by all means build it there, and climb our way up to hard scold, knock the bell, sound the hour, Pipkin. Hop it, lads! Climb those stairs.
What stairs?
These, here and here.
Bricks fell in place. The boys leaped, and as they put a foot up out and down. A stair came under it, one stone at a time. Said the bell.
Help!
Said Pipkin. Feet galloping, empty air came down to tap, rustle, clomp on. A step, another step, and yet another, and another climbing empty space.
Help!
Said Pipkin. Again went the hollow bell. So they ran on emptiness, with Mount Shroud prodding, shoving after. They ran on pure windy light, only to have bricks and stones and mortar shuffle like cords, deal themselves solid, take form beneath their toes and heels. It was like racing up through a cake that built itself layer on stone layer, and the wild bell, and sad Pipkin shouting and pleading them on.
Our shadow, there it is,
said Tom, and indeed, the shadow of this cathedral, the splendid Notre Dame, was tossed by moonlight all across France and half of Europe.
Up, boys, up! No pause, no rest! Run!
Help!
They ran. They began to fall with each step, but again and again and again steps came in place and saved them, and ran them taller, so the shadow of the spires loomed tall across rivers and fields to snuff the last witch fires at crossroads. Crones, hags, wise men, demon lovers 1,000 miles off, snuffed like candles, whiffed to smoke, wailed and sank to hide as the church leaned, tilted across the heavens.
So even as the Romans cut down druid trees and chopped their god of the dead to fall, we now with this church, boys, cast such a shadow as knocks all witches off their stilts and puts seedy sorcerers and trite magicians to heel. No more small witch fires, only this great lit candle. Notre Dame! Presto!
The boys laughed with delight, for the last step fell in place. They had reached the top. Gasping, Notre Dame Cathedral was finished and built. The last soft hour was struck. The great bronze bell shuddered and hung empty. The boys leaned to peer into a cavernous mouth. There was no clapper inside, shaped like Pipkin.
Pipkin?
They whispered.
Ken?
Echoed the bell in a small echo.
He's here somewhere, up in the air. Meet him's what he promised, and Pipkin falls back on no promises,
says Mount Shroud.
Look about, boys. Fine handiwork, eh? Centuries of toil done in a fast gallop and sneeze, right? But something beside Pipkin's missing. What? Glance up. Scan round, eh?
The boys peered. They puzzled.
Don't the place look awful plain, boys? Awful untouched and unornamented? Gargoyles!
Everyone turned to look at it. Wally Babb, who was dressed as a gargoyle for Halloween. His face fairly beamed with revelation.
Gargoyles? This place has got no gargoyles!
Gargoyles,
Mount Shroud uttered and ululated and beautifully ribboned the word with his lizardy tongue.
Gargoyles. Shall we put them on, boys?
How?
Why, I should think we could whistle them in place. Whistle for demons, boys. Whistle for fiends. Give a high tootling blow for beasties and ferocious fanged loomers of the dark.
Wally Babb sucked in a great breath.
Here's mine!
He whistled. All whistled. And the gargoyles, they came running. The unemployed of all midnight Europe shivered in their stone sleep and came awake, which is to say that all the old beasts, all the old tales, all the old nightmares, all the old unused demons put by, and witches left in the lurch, quaked at the call, reared at the whistle, trembled at the summons, and in dust devils of propulsion skimmed down the roads, flitted skies, buckshot through shaken trees, forded streams, swam rivers, pierced clouds, and arrived which is still to say that all the dead statues and idols and semi-gods and demigods of Europe lying like a dreadful snow all about, abandoned in ruins, gave a blink and start and came as salamanders on the road, or bats in the skies, or dingoes in the brush. They flew, they galloped, they skittered, to the general excitement and amazement, and much babbling shout from the fringe of boys leaning out, Mountain leaning with them as the mobs of strange beasts came from north, south, east, west, to panic at the gates and wait for whistles.
Shall we drop white-hot boiling lead down on them?
The boys saw Mountain smile.
Heck no,
Tom said.
Hunchback already did that years ago.
Well then, no burning lava. So, shall we whistle them up?
They all whistled. And obedient to summons, the mobs, the flocks, the prides, the crush, the collection, the raving flocks of monsters, beasts, vices rampant, virtues gone sour, discarded saints, misguided prides, hollow pomps oozed, slid, succored, pelted, ran bold, and ran up the sides of Notre Dame in a flood tide of nightmare, in a tidal wave of outcry and shamble. They inundated the cathedral, to cross themselves on every pinion and upthrust stone. So here ran pigs, and there climbed Satan's ghosts, and yet another wall, new devils, which recarved themselves along the way, dropped horns and grew new ones, shaved beards to sprout tendril earthworm mustaches. Sometimes a swarm of only masks and faces scuttled up the walls and took the buttress heights, carried by an army of crawfish and wobbly, crotchety lobsters. Here came the heads of gorillas, full of sin and teeth. There came men's heads with sausages in their mouths. Beyond danced the mask of a fool upheld by a spider that knew ballet. So much was going on that Tom said,
My gosh, so much is going on!
And more to come. There,
said Mountain, for now that Notre Dame was infested with various beasts and spidering leers and gloom and gloms and masks. Why, here came dragons chasing children and whales swallowing Jonahs and chariots chock full of skulls and bones, acrobats and tumblers yanked out of shape by demi-demons, limped and fell in strange postures to freeze on the roof. All accompanied by pigs with harps and sows with piccolos, and dogs playing bagpipes, so the music itself helped charm and pull new mobs of grotesques up the walls to be trapped and caught forever in sockets of stone. Here an ape plucked a lyre, there floundered a woman with a fish's tail. Now a sphinx flew out of the night, shed its wings and became woman and lion half and half, settled to snooze away the centuries in the shadow and sound of high bells.
Why, what are those?
Cried Tom. Mountain leaning over, gave a snort.
Oh, why those are sins, boys, and nondescripts. There crawls the worm of conscience.
They looked to see it crawl. It crawled very fine.
Now,
whispered Mountain softly.
Settle, slumber, sleep.
And the flocks of strange creatures turned about 3 times like evil dogs and lay down. All beasts took root. All grimaces froze the stone. All cries faded. The moon shadowed and lit the gargoyles of Notre Dame.
Does it make sense, Tom?
Sure. All the old gods and the old dreams, all the old nightmares, all the old ideas with nothing to do and out of work. We gave them work. We called them here.
And here they will remain for centuries, right?
Right.
They looked down over the rim. There was a mob of beasts on the east battlement, a crowd of sins on the west, a surge of nightmares on the south, and a fine scuttle of unnamed vices and ill-kept virtues to the north.
I
said Tom, proud of this night's work.
Wouldn't mind living here.
The wind crooned in the mouths of the beasts. Their fangs hissed and whistled.
Much thanks.
Jehoshaphat,
said Tom Skeleton on the parapet.
we whistled all the stone griffins and demons here. Now Pipkin's lost again. I was thinking, why can't we whistle him?
Mount Shroud laughed so his cape boomed on the night wind and his dry bones jangled inside his skin.
Boys, look around. He's still here.
Where?
Here.
Mourned a small, faraway voice. The boys crickled their spines looking over the parapet, cracked their necks staring up.
Look and find, lads. Hide and seek.
And even in seeking, they could not help but enjoy once more the turbulent slates of the cathedral, all fringed with horrors, and deliciously ugly with trapped beasts. Where was Pipkin among all those dark sea creatures with gills gaped open, like mouths for an eternal gasp and sigh? Where among all those lovely chiseled nightmares cut from the gallstone of night lurks and monsters, cracked out of old earthquakes, vomited up from mad volcanoes which cooled themselves to frights and deliriums?
Here.
Wailed a far, small, familiar voice again, and way down on a ledge, halfway to the earth, the boys, squinting, thought they saw one small, round, beautiful, angel-devil face with a familiar eye, a familiar nose, a friendly and familiar mouth.
Pipkin!
Shouting, they ran down stairways along dark corridors until they reached a ledge, far out there on the windy air, above a very narrow walkway indeed, was that small face, lovely among so much ugliness. Tom went first, not looking down, spread-eagling himself. Ralph followed.
Watch out, Tom, don't fall. I'm not falling. Here's Pip.
And there he was, standing in a line directly under the outmost stone mask, the bust, the head of a gargoyle. They looked up at that mighty fine profile, that great nub nose, that unbearded cheek, that fuzzy cap of marbled hair. Pipkin,
Pip, for crying, what are you doing here?
called Tom. Pip said nothing. His mouth was cut stone,
Oh, it's just a rock.
said Ralph.
Just a gargoyle carved here a long time ago that looks like Pipkin. No, I heard him call. But how?
And then the wind gave them the answer. It blew around the high corners of Notre Dame. It fluted in the ears and piped out the gaping mouths of the gargoyles. Whispered Pipkin's voice. The hair stood up on the backs of their necks. Murmured the stone mouth,
Listen, there it is.
said Ralph excitedly.
Shut up.
Cried Tom.
Pip, next time the wind blows, tell us. How do we help? What got you here? How do we get you down?
Silence. The boys clung to the rock cliff face of the great cathedral. Then another swoop of wind sucked by, drew their breaths, and whistled in the carved stone boy's teeth.
One
Said Pip's voice.
question.
Whispered Pip's voice again after a pause. Silence. More wind. The boys waited.
Time. One question at a time.
Translated Tom. The boys hooted with laughter. That was Pip, all right.
Okay.
Tom gathered his spit.
What are you doing up here?
The wind blew sadly, and the voice spoke as from deep in an old well.
Been so many places in just a few hours.
The boys waited, grinding their teeth.
Speak up, Pipkin.
The wind came back to mourn in the open stone mouth, but the wind had died. It had begun to rain, and this was best of all, for the raindrops ran cold in Pipkin's stone ears, and out along his nose and fountain from his marble mouth, so that he began to utter syllables in liquid tongues, with clear, cold rainwater words.
Hey, this is better.
He spouted mist. He sprayed quick rain.
You should have been where I've been. Gosh, I was buried for a mummy. I was trapped in a dog. We guessed that was you, Pipkin. And now here,
said the rain in the ear, the rain in the nose, the rain in the clear, dripping marble mouth.
Gosh golly, funny, strange, inside this rock with all these devils and demons for pals, and 10 minutes from now, who knows where I'll be? Higher up or buried deep? Where, Pipkin?
The boys jostled. The rain squalled and beat them so they almost tilted and fell off the edge.
Are you dead, Pipkin? No, not yet,
said the cold rain in his mouth.
Part of me in a hospital a long way off home. Part of me in that old Egyptian tomb. Part of me in the grass in England. Part of me here. Part of me in the worst place. Where? I don't know. Oh gosh. One minute I'm yelling last, the next I'm scared. Just now, this very minute, I guess I know I'm scared. Help me, guys. Help, oh please.
Rain poured out his eyes like tears. The boys reached up to touch Pipkin's chin as best they could. But before they could touch, a lightning bolt struck out of the sky. It flashed blue and white. The entire cathedral shook. The boys had to grab demons' horns and angels' wings on either side so as not to be knocked off. Thunder and smoke, and a great scattering of rock and stone. Pipkin's face was gone, knocked off by the lightning bolt that fell down through space to shatter the ground below.
Pipkin!
But there below on the cathedral porch stones, flinty fire sparks blowing away, and a fine gargoyle dust. Nose, chin, stone lip, hard cheek, bright eye, carved fine ear, all whipped away on the wind in chaff and shrapnel dust. They saw something like a spirit smoke, a bloom of gunpowder blow drifting south and west. Mexico. Mounshroud, one of the few men in all the world who knew how to utter the word.
Mexico?
The last grand travel of this night, said Mounshroud, still uttering, savoring the syllables. Whistle, boys. Scream like tigers, cry like panthers, shriek like carnivores.
Scream? Cry? Shriek?
Reassemble the kite, lads, the kite of autumn. Paste back the fangs and fiery eyes and bloody talons. Yell the wind to sew it all together in riders high and long and last. Bray, boys, whimper, trumpet, shout! The boys hesitated. Mounshroud ran along the ledge like someone racketing a picket fence. He knocked each boy with his knee and elbow. The boys fell, and falling gave each his particular whimper, shriek, or scream. Plummeting down through cold space, they felt the tail of a murderous peacock flourish beneath. All blood-filled eye. 10,000 burning eyes came up, hovered suddenly round a windy corner of gargoyles. The autumn kite, freshly assembled, broke their fall. They grabbed. They held to the rim, to edge, to cross struts, and to trap drum rattling papers, to bits and tatters and shreds of old meat-breath lion mouth and stale blood tiger's maw. Mounshroud leaped up to grab. This time, he was the tail. The autumn kite hovered, waiting, 8 boys upon its billowing surf of teeth and eyes. Mounshroud turned his ear. Hundreds of miles away, beggars ran down Irish roads, starving, asking for food from door to door. Their cries rose in the night. Fred Fryer, in his beggar's costume, heard.
That way! Let's fly there! No time. Listen.
Thousands of miles away, there was a faint tap-hammering of death-watch beetles ticking the night. The coffin makers of Mexico. Mounshroud smiled. In the streets with their long boxes and nails and little hammers,
Tapping, tapping,
Pipkin?
whispered the boys.
we hear,
Said Moundsrod.
and to Mexico we go.
The autumn kite boomed them away on 1,000-foot tidal wave of wind, the gargoyles fluting in their stone nostrils, gaping their marble lips, used the same wind to wail them farewell. They hung above Mexico. They hung above an island in that lake in Mexico. They heard dogs barking in the night far below. They saw a few boats on the moonlit lake moving like water insects. They heard a guitar playing and a man singing in a high, sad voice. A long way off across the dark borders of land, in the United States, packs of children, mobs of dogs ran laughing, barking, knocking from door to door, their hands full of sweet bags of treasure, wild with joy on Halloween night.
But here,
Whispered Tom.
Hear what?
Asked Moundsrod, hovering at his elbow.
oh, why here? And down there, all of South America. Yes, south. Here and south, all the cemeteries, all the graveyards are full of candlelight.
Tom thought. 1,000 candles in this cemetery. 100 candles in that graveyard. 10,000 small flickering lights farther on 100 miles. 5,000 miles down to the very tip of Argentina.
Is that the way they celebrate?
El Día de los Muertos. How's your grade school Spanish, Tom?
The Day of the Dead Ones.
Caramba, sí! Kite, disassemble.
Swooping down, the kite flew apart for a final time. The boys stumbled on the stony shore of the quiet lake. Mists hung over the waters. Far across the lake they could see an unlit tomb yard. There were, as yet, no candles burning in it. Out of the mists, a dugout canoe moved silently without oars, as if the tide touched it across the waters. A tall figure in a gray winding sheet stood motionless in one end of the boat. The boat nudged the grassy shore softly. The boys gasped, for as far as they could tell, only darkness was cupped inside the hood of the shrouded figure.
Mr. Moundsrod?
They knew it had to be him. But he said nothing. Only the faintest firefly of a grin flickered within the cowl. A bony hand gestured. The boys stumbled into the boat. "Shh," whispered a voice from the empty hood. The figure gestured again, and, touched by the wind, they blew across the dark waters, under a night sky filled with the billion never-before-seen fires of the stars. Far off on the dark island, there was a prickle of guitar sound. A single candle was lit in the graveyard. Somewhere, someone blew a musical sound on a flute. Another candle was lit among the tombstones. Someone sang a single word of a song. A third candle was touched to life by a flaming match. And the faster the boat moved, the more guitar notes sounded, and the more candles were lit high among the mounds of the stony hills. 12, 100, 1,000 candles flared until it looked as if the great Andromeda star cluster had fallen out of the sky and tilted itself to rest here in the middle of almost midnight Mexico. The boat struck the shore. The boys, surprised, fell out. They spun about, but Moundsrod was gone. Only his winding sheet lay empty on the boat. A guitar called to them. A voice sang to them. A road like a river of white stones and white rocks led up through the town that was like a graveyard. To the graveyard that was like a town, for there were no people in the town. The boys reached the low wall of the graveyard, and then the huge lacework iron gates. They took hold of the iron rungs and stared in.
Why,
Gasped Tom.
I never ever seen the like.
For now they knew why the town was empty. Because the graveyard was full. By every grave was a woman kneeling to place gardenias or azaleas or marigolds in a frame upon the stone. By every grave knelt a daughter who was lighting a new candle or lighting a candle that had just blown out. By every grave was a quiet boy with bright brown eyes, and in one hand, papier-mâché funeral parade glued to a shingle, and in the other hand, a papier-mâché skeleton head which rattled with rice or nuts inside.
Look,
Whispered Tom. There were hundreds of graves. There were hundreds of women. There were hundreds of daughters. There were hundreds of sons, and hundreds upon thousands of candles, and hundreds upon thousands of candles. The whole graveyard was one swarm of candle shine, as if a population of fireflies had heard of a grand conglomeration, and had flown here to settle in and flame upon the stones and light the brown faces and the dark eyes and the black hair.
Boy,
Said Tom, half to himself.
at home, we never go to the graveyard except maybe Memorial Day, once a year, and then at high noon. Full sun. No fun. This is fun. Sure.
Whisper yelled everyone.
Mexican Halloweens are better than ours.
For on every grave were plates of cookies shaped like funeral priests, or skeletons, or ghosts, waiting to be nibbled by living people, or by ghosts that might come along toward dawn, hungry and forlorn. No one knew. No one said. And each boy inside the graveyard, next to his sister and mother, put down the miniature funeral on the grave, and they could see the tiny candy person inside the tiny wooden coffin placed before a tiny altar with tiny candles. And around the tiny coffin stood tiny altar boys with peanuts for heads, and eyes painted on the peanut shells. And before the altar stood a priest with a corn nut for a head and a walnut for a stomach. And on the altar was a photograph of the person in the coffin, a real person once, remembered now.
Better, and still better. Calaveras.
Sang a far voice up the hill. Inside the graveyard, voices echoed the song. Leaning against the graveyard walls, some with guitars in their hands or bottles, were the men of the village.
Calaveras de los muertos.
Sang the faraway voice.
Calaveras de los muertos.
Sang the men in the shadows inside the gate.
Skulls,
Translated Tom.
the skulls of the dead. Skulls, sweet sugar skulls, sweet candy skulls. The skulls of the dead ones, sang the voice, coming close now.
And down the hill, treading softly in shadow, came a hunchbacked vendor of the skulls.
No, not hunched.
Said Tom half aloud.
A whole load of skulls on his back.
Cried Tom. Sweet skulls, sweet white crystal sugar candy skulls, sang the vendor, his face hidden under the vast sombrero. But it was Mountrout's voice that sweetly piped. And carried from a long bamboo over his shoulder, hung on black threads, were dozens and scores of sugar skulls as big as their own heads, and each skull was inscribed.
Nombres, nombres,
Sang the old vendor.
tell me your name. I give you your skull.
Tom!
Said Tom. The old man plucked forth the skull. On it, in huge letters, was written Tom. Tom took and held his own name, his own sweet edible skull in his fingers,
Ralph!
and the skull with the name Ralph written on it was tossed forth. Ralph caught it laughing. In a swift game, the bony hand plucked, tossed white skull after skull sweetly on the cool air.
Henry, Hank, Fred, George, Hackles, JJ, Wally.
The boys bombarded, squealed, and danced about, pelted with their own skulls and their own proud names, sugar encrusted upon each white brow of those skulls. They caught and almost dropped this splendid bombardment. They stood, mouths wide open, staring at the sugary death sweets in their gummy hands. And from within the graveyard, way high, mild soprano voices sang,
Roberto, Maria, Conchita, Tomas, Calavera, Calavera, sweet candy buns to eat, your name on the snow white sweet skull. You hurry down the street, you buy from the piled high white hills on the square, buy and eat, true your name was a treat.
The boys lifted the sweet skulls in their fingers.
Bite the T and the O and the M, Tom. Chew the H, swallow A, digest in, choke on K, Hank.
Their mouths watered, but Was it poison they held?
Would you guess? Such happiness, such joy, as each boy dines on darkness, makes a meal of the night. What delight! Snap a bite. Go ahead, munch that fine candy head.
The boys tapped the sweet candy names to their lips and were about to bite when
Ole!
a mob of Mexican boys ran up yelling their names, seizing its skulls.
Thomas!
And Tom saw Tomas run off with his name skull.
Hey,
Said Tom.
he sort of looked like me.
Did he? Said the vendor of skulls.
Enrique!
Shouted a small Indian boy seizing Henry Hank's skull. Enrique pelted down the hill.
He looked like me.
Said Henry Hank. He did, said Moundsrod. Quick, boys, see what they're up to. Hold on to your sweet craniums and get. The boys jumped, for at that very moment an explosion hit the streets below, in the town. Then another explosion and another. Fireworks. The boys took a last look in at the flowers, the graves, cookies, food, skulls upon graves, miniature funerals with miniature bodies and coffins, at candles, crouched women, lonely boys, girls, men, then whirled and exploded down the hill towards the firecrackers. Into the plaza, Tom and Ralph and all the other costume boys raced panting. They jolted to a halt and danced about as 1,000 miniature firecrackers banged at their shoes. The lights were on. Suddenly, the shops were open, and Tomas and Jose Juan and Enrique were lighting and tossing the firecrackers with yells.
Hey, Tom, from me, Thomas!
Tom saw his own eyes glinting from the wild boy's face.
Hey, Henry, this is Enrique. Bang! JJ, this, bang, from Jose Juan. Oh, this is the best Halloween of all,
said Tom. And it was. For never in all their wild travels had so much happened to be seen, smelled, and touched. In every alley and door and window were mounds of sugar skulls with beautiful names. From every alley came the tap-tap of death-watched beetle coffin makers, nailing, hammering, tapping coffin lids like wooden drums in the night. On every corner were stacks of newspapers with pictures of the mayor and his body painted in like a skeleton, or the president and his body all bones, or the loveliest maiden dressed like a xylophone, and death playing a tune on her musical ribs.
Calavera, calavera, calavera.
The song drifted down the hill. See the politicians buried in the news, rest in peace beneath their names, such as fame.
See the skeletons juggling, standing high on each other's shoulders, preaching sermons, wrestling, playing soccer. Like runners, like jumpers, like skeletons that leap about to fall. Did you ever dream that death could be whittled down so very small?
And the song was true. Wherever the boys looked, were the miniature acrobats, trapeze performers, basketball players, priests, jugglers, tumblers, but all were skeletons hand to hand, bony shoulder to shoulder, and all small enough for you to carry in your fingers. And over there in a window was a whole microscopic jazz band with a skeleton trumpeter and a skeleton drummer and a skeleton playing a tuba no bigger than a soup spoon and a skeleton conductor with a bright cap on his head and a baton in his hand. The tiny music pouring out of the tiny horns. Never before had the boys seen so many bones.
Bones!
Laughed everyone.
Oh, lovely bones!
The song began to fade.
Hold the dark holiday in your palms. Bite it, swallow it, and survive. Come out the far black tunnel of El Dia del Muerte. And be glad, so glad, you are alive. Calavera, calavera.
The newspapers, bordered in black, blew away in white funerals on the wind. The Mexican boys ran away up the hill to their families.
Oh, strange, funny, strange,
whispered Tom.
What? said Ralph at his elbow.
Up in Illinois, we've forgotten what it's all about. I mean, the dead up in our town tonight, heck, they're forgotten. Nobody remembers. Nobody cares. Nobody goes to sit and talk to them. Boy, that's lonely. That's really sad. But here, why shucks, it's both happy and sad. It's all firecrackers and skeleton toys down here in the plaza, and up in that graveyard now are all the Mexican dead folks with the families visiting, and flowers and candles and singing and candy. I mean, it's almost like Thanksgiving, huh? And everyone's set down to dinner, but only half the people able to eat. But that's no mind. They're there. It's like holding hands at a seance with your friends, but some of the friends gone. Oh, heck, Ralph? Yeah,
said Ralph, nodding behind his mask.
Heck. Look, oh, look there,
said JJ. The boys looked. On top of a mound of white sugar skulls was one with the name Pipkin on it. Pipkin's sweet skull. But nowhere in all the explosions and dancing bones and flying skulls was there so much as one dust speck or whimper of shadow of Pip. They had grown so accustomed to Pip's leaping up in fantastic surprises on the sides of Notre Dame or weighted down in gold sarcophagi that they had expected him, like a jack-in-the-box, to pop from a mound of sugar skulls, flap sheets in their faces, cry dirges. But no, suddenly, no Pip. No Pip at all. And maybe no Pip ever again. The boys shivered. A cold wind blew fog up from the lake. Along the dark night street, around a corner, came a woman bearing over her shoulders twin scoops of mounded charcoals, burning. From these heaps of pink burning coals, firefly sparks scattered and blew in the wind. Where she passed on bare feet, she left a trail of little sparks which died. Without a word, shuffling, she went around another corner and into an alley, gone. After her came a man carrying on his head, lightly, a small coffin. It was a box made of plain white wood nailed shut. On the sides and on top of the box were pinned cheap silver rosettes, handmade silk and paper flowers. Inside the box was... The boys stared as a funeral parade of two went by. Two, thought Tom. The man and the box. Yes, and the thing inside the box. The man, his face solemn, balancing the coffin on the top of his head, walked tall into the nearby church. Stuttered Tom.
Was that Pip again? Inside that box?
What do you think, lad? Asked Moundshroud.
I don't know,
cried Tom.
I only know I had enough. The night's been too long. I seen too much. I know everything. Gosh, everything. Yeah,
said everyone, clustering close, shivering.
And we've got to get home, don't we? What about Pipkin? Where is he? Is he alive or dead? Can we save him? Is he lost? Are we too late? What do we do? What?
Cried everyone, and the same questions flew and burst from their mouths and welled in their eyes. They all took hold of Moundshroud as if to press the answer from him, yank it out of his elbows.
What do we do?
To save Pipkin, one last thing. Look up in this tree. Dangling from the tree were dozens of Halloween piñatas, devils, ghosts, skulls, witches that swayed in the wind. Break your piñata, boys. Sticks were thrust in their hands. Strike! Yelling, they struck. The piñatas exploded, and from the skeleton piñata, 1,000 small skeleton leaves fell in a shower. They swarmed on Tom. The wind blew skeletons, leaves, and Tom away. And from the mummy piñata fell hundreds of frail Egyptian mummies, which rushed away into the sky, Ralph with them. And so each boy struck and cracked and let down small vinegar gnat dancing images of himself so that devils, witches, ghosts shrieked and seized, and all the boys and leaves went tumbling through the sky, with Moundshroud laughing after. They ricocheted in the final alleys of the town. They banged and skipped like stones across the lake waters, to land rolling in a jumble of knees and elbows on a yet farther hill. They sat up. They found themselves in the middle of an abandoned graveyard with no people, no lights,
only stones like immense wedding cakes, frosted with old moonlight. And as they watched, Mounshroud, landing light on his feet in a swift, quiet motion, bent. He reached for an iron rung in the earth. He pulled. With a shriek of hinges, a trap door in the earth gaped wide. The boys came to stand at the edge of the big hole. Stuttered Tom.
Catacombs?
Catacombs. Mounshroud pointed. Stairs led down into a dry dust earth. The boys swallowed hard.
Is Pip down there?
Go bring him up, boys.
Is he alone down there?
No. Things are with him. Things. Who goes first?
Not me.
Silence,
Me.
said Tom at last. He put his foot on the first step down. He sank into the earth. He took another step. Then suddenly, he was gone. The others followed. They went down the steps in a single file, and with each step down, the dark got darker, and with each step down, the silence grew more silent, and with each step down, the night became deep as a well and very black indeed, and with each step down, the shadows waited and seemed to lean from walls. And with each step down, strange things seemed to smile at them from the long cave which waited below. Bats seemed to be hanging clustered just over their heads, squeaking so high you could not hear them, only dogs might hear. Half hysterics, jumping out of their skins and run off. With each step down, the town got farther away, and the earth, and all the nice people of the earth. Even the graveyard above seemed far away. They felt lonely. They felt so alone they wanted to cry. For each step down was a billion miles lost from life, and warm beds and good candlelight and mothers, voices and fathers, pipe smoke and clearing his voice in the night which made you feel good knowing he was there somewhere in the dark, alive and turning in his sleep and able to hit anything with his fists if it had to be hit. Each step down, and at last, at the bottom of the stairs, they peered into the long cave, the long hall, and all the people were there and very quiet. They had been quiet for so long. Some of them had been quiet for 30 years. Some had been silent for 40 years. Some had been completely mum for 70 years.
There they are,
said Tom.
The mummies?
Someone whispered.
The mummies.
A long line of them, standing against the walls. 50 mummies standing against the right wall, and 50 mummies standing against the left wall, and 4 mummies waiting at the far end in the dark. 104 dry as dust mummies, more alone than they, more lonely than they might ever feel in life, abandoned here, left below, far from dog barks and fireflies and the sweet singing of men and guitars in the night.
Oh, boy,
said Tom.
All those poor people, I heard of them. What? Their folks couldn't pay the rent on their graves, so the gravedigger dug up these people and put them down here. The earth is so dry it makes mummies out of them. And look, see how they're dressed.
The boys looked and saw that some of the ancient people were dressed like farmers, and some like peasant maids, and some like businessmen in old dark suits, and even one like a bullfighter in his dusty suit of lights. But inside their suits, they were all thin bones and skin and spiderweb and dust that shook down through their ribs if you sneezed and trembled them.
What's that? What's what?
Sssst. Everyone listened. They peered into the long vault. All the mummies looked back with empty eyes. All the mummies waited with empty hands. Someone was weeping at the far end of the long dark hall. Came the sound. Oh. Came the crying. And the small voice wept.
That's Pip. Only heard him cry once, but that's him. Pipkin, and he's trapped there in the catacomb.
The boys stared, and they saw, 100 feet away, crouched down in a corner, trapped at the most distant part of the catacomb, a small figure that moved. The shoulders twitched, The head was bent and covered with trembling hands, and behind the hands the mouth wailed and was afraid.
Pipkin?
The crying stopped.
Is that you?
Whispered Tom. A long pause, a trembled insuck of breath, and then,
Yes. Pip, for crying... What are you doing here? I don't know. Come out? I can't. I'm afraid. But, Pip, if you stay there...
Tom paused. Pip, he thought.
Pip,
He thought.
if you stay forever. You stay with all the silence and the lonely ones. You stand in the long line and tourists come and look at you and buy tickets to look at you some more. Pip!
Said Ralph behind his mask.
You gotta come out! I can't.
Pip sobbed.
They won't let me. They?
But they knew he meant the long line of mummies. In order to get out, he would have to run the gauntlet between the nightmares, the mysteries, the dreadful ones, the dyers, and the haunts.
They can't stop you, Pip.
Pip said.
Oh, yes, they can.
Said echoes deep in the catacomb.
I'm afraid to come out. And we're
Said Ralph.
afraid to go in.
Thought everyone.
Maybe if we choose one brave one.
Said Tom, and stopped. For Pipkin was crying again, and the mummies waiting, and the night so dark in the long tomb hall that you would sink right through the floor if you had stepped on it, and never move again. The floor would seize your ankles with bony marble and hold you until the freezing cold froze you into a dry dust statue forever.
Maybe if we went in a mob, all of us.
Said Ralph, and they tried to move. Like a big spider with many legs, the boys tried to cram through the door. 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and Pipkin wept, at which sound they all fell upon themselves, gibbering and scrambled, yelling their dyers and frights back to the door. They heard an avalanche of heartbeats, bang pains in their chest.
Oh, my gosh, what are we gonna do? Him afraid to come, us afraid to go? What?
Wailed Tom. Behind them, leaning against the wall, was Mounshroud, forgotten. A little candle flame of smile flickered and went out among his teeth.
Here, boys. Save him with this.
Mounshroud reached into his dark cloak and brought forth a familiar white sugar candy skull, across the brow of which was written Pipkin.
Save Pipkin, lads. Strike a bargain.
With who?
With me and others unnamed. Here, break this skull in 8 delicious bites, boys. Hand them round. P for you, Tom, and I for you, Ralph. And half of the other B for you, Hank. And the other half for you, JJ. And some of the K for you, boy. And some for you. And here's the I and the final N. Touch the sweet bits, lads. Listen, here's the dark seal. Do you truly want Pipkin to live?
Such a fury of protest burst forth at this. Mounshroud was fair driven back by it. The boys barked like dogs against his, so much as questioning their need for Pip's survival.
There,
He curried them.
I see you mean it. Well then, will you each give 1 year from the end of your life, boys?
What?
Said Tom.
I mean it, boys. 1 precious year from the far burned candle end of your life, with 1 year apiece. You can ransom dead Pipkin.
A year?
The whisper, the murmur, the appalling sum of it ran among them. It was hard to grasp. A year so far away was no year at all. Boys of 11 or 12 cannot guess at men of 70.
A year? A year? Why, sure, why not?
Think, boys, think! This is no idle bargain struck with nothing. I mean it. It is true and a fact. It is a grave condition you make, and a grave bargain you strike. 1 year each of you must promise to give. You won't miss the year now, of course, for you are very young, And I see by touching your minds you cannot even guess the final situation. Only later, 50 years from this night, or 60 years from this dawn, when you are running low on time and dearly wish an extra day or so of fine weather and much joy, then's when Mr. D for Doom or Mr. B for Bones will show up with his bill to be paid. Or perhaps I will come, old Mound Shroud himself, a friend to lads, and say, deliver. So a year promised, it must be a year given over. I'll say give, and you must give. What will that mean to each of you? It will mean that those of you who might have lived to be 71 must die at 70. Some of you who might have lived to be 86 must cough up your ghost at 85. That's a great age. A year more or less doesn't sound like much. When the time comes, boys, you may regret it, but you will be able to say, this year I spent well. I gave a pip that alone of life for sweet Pipkin, the fairest apple that ever almost fell too early off the harvest tree. Some of you at 49 must cross life at 48. Some at 55 must lay down to forever sleep at 54. Do you catch the whole thing intact now, boys? Do you add the figures? Is the arithmetic plain? A year. Who will bid 365 entire days from out his own life to get old Pipkin back? Think, boys. Silence. Then speak.
There was a long, brooding silence of arithmetic students doing inward sums, and the sums were very fast indeed. There was no question, though they knew that years from now they might doubt this dreadful haste. Yet what else could they do? Only swim out from shore and save the drowning boy before he sank a last time into the frightening dust.
Me.
Said Tom.
I'll give you a year. And me.
Said Ralph.
I'm in.
Said Henry Hank. And me, and me, and me, said all the rest of the boys. Do you know what you pledge, boys? You do love Pipkin, then?
Yes. Yes.
So be it, boys. Chew and eat, lads. Eat and chew. They popped the sweet bits of candy skull in their mouths. They chewed. They ate. Swallow darkness, boys. Give up your year. They swallowed hard, so hard that their eyes shone bright and their ears banged and their hearts beat. They felt something like a cage of birds let out of their chest, and bodies and flying off, invisible. They saw but did not see the years they gave as gifts wing off round the world to settle somewhere in good payment for strange debts. They heard a yell.
Here!
And then,
and
then,
come!
bang, 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 the 3 words and 3 sounds of shoes hitting stone. And along the hall and between the rows of mummies which leaned out to stop but did not stop, between the silent shrieks and screams, hell-bent rushing, racing, flinging his feet, pumping his elbows, puffing his cheeks, shutting his eyes, snorting his nostrils, and bang, bang, banging the floor with his up and down feet came Pipkin. Oh, how he ran!
Look at him come! Come on, Pipkin! Come on, Pip! Pip, you're halfway! Look at him race!
Said everyone with sugar candy in their mouths, with the honorable name of Pipkin locked in their sweet teeth, with his savor in their jaws, with his fine name on their tongues. Pip, Pip, Pipkin.
Don't stop now, Pip! Don't look back! Don't fall down! Here he comes 3/4 of the way!
Pip ran the gauntlet. He was good and fine and fast and true. Between 100 waiting mummies he ran without touching and did not look back, and he won the race.
Pip, you did it! You're safe!
But Pip kept running, not only through the gauntlet of dead ones, but the gauntlet of warm, sweating, alive, yelling boys. He plowed them aside and raced upstairs, gone.
Pip, it's all right! Come back!
They ran up the stairs after.
Where's he going, Mr. Moundshroud?
Well, I should imagine, scared as he is, said Mountrout. Home.
Is Pipkin saved?
Let's go see, boys. Up! He spun about like a whirlwind, his arms flung out, cut the air in slicing grabs and swoops. So fast he spun that he made a vacuum, a self-made storm. This cyclone, this huge upsuck of air, then seized the boys by ear, nose, elbow, and toe. Like so many leaves stripped from a tree, they yelled themselves into the sky. Mountrout raving sank up, and they, if that is possible, sank and plummeted after. They hit the clouds like an explosion of gunshot. They followed Mountrout like a flock of north-rushing birds heading home before their season. The earth seemed to give a turn from north to south. 1,000 small villages and towns spun under. A light with candles flickering in tomb yards through all of Mexico. A light with candles flickering in pumpkins north of the border across Texas and then Oklahoma and Kansas and Iowa and at last Illinois and at last.
Home!
Cried Tom.
There's the courthouse, there's my house, there's the Halloween tree.
They swooped once around the courthouse and twice around the 1,000 pumpkin burning tree and a final time around old Mountrout's tall house. With its many gables, many rooms, many gaping windows, high lightning rods, railings, attic scrollworks, which leaned and groaned in the wind their passage made. Dust sifted out the windows to greet them. Shades flapped in yet other windows like ancient tongues, lolling to disguise by wind-borne small doctors of strange medicines. Ghosts withered like white flowers, furling and unfurling in mouldered flags, which fell to ruin even as they shot by, and the whole house circled was like all of Halloween ever. So cried Mountrout, flapping his antique arms in webs and black silks as he landed on the roof, and beckoned the boys to alight, and pointed down through an immense sky window through all the levels of his mansion. The boys gathered round the skylight window and stared down a stairwell, which opened out at various floors to various times and histories of men, and skeletons and dreadful musics played on flute bones. There it is, boys. Will you look? Do you see? There's our whole 10,000-year flight. There's our whole trip in one place. From caveman to Egyptian to Roman front porch to English harvest field to boneyard in Mexico. Mountrout lifted the vast pane of glass. The stairway banister, boys. Write it down. Each to his own time, his own age, his own level. Leap off where your costume fits, where you think you and your disguise, your mask, belong. Get! The boys leaped. They sprang down the stairway to the top landing. Then one by one, they popped onto the banister and slid yelling down through all the floors. All the levels, all the ages of history kept within Mountrout's incredible mansion. Roundabout down they whisked. They skidded, they shuffled on the waxed rail. Room thud! JJ, in his ape-man costume, landed in the basement. He glanced about. He saw cave paintings, dim smokes and fires and shadows of hulking gorilla men. Saber-tooths burned their eyes at him from the cinder dark. Down around Rush went Ralph, the Egyptian mummified boy, bandaged for all ages, to land on the first floor where Egyptian hieroglyphs strutted in armies of symbol, with squadrons of ancient birds in skies and flocks of beast gods and scuttling golden beetles rolling dung balls down history. Crash! Hackles Nibley, with his scythe somehow still flashing in his hands, hit and almost rolled himself to mincemeat on the second floor, where the shadow of Sam Hain, druid god of the dead, raised up his scythe upon a far chamber wall. Bang! George Smith, a Greek ghost, a Roman haunt, landed on the third floor near tar-painted porches with glued old wandering spirits to the sill. Thud! Henry Hank, the witch, plopped down in the fourth landing amid witches leaping bonfires in English, French, German countrysides. Fred Fryer, the fifth floor, took him in a heap. The beggar landing among sounds of beggars begging the country roads of Ireland, starving. Wally Barb, the gargoyle himself, flew and crashed on the 6th floor where walls sprouted elbows and limbs and lumps, grimaces of fine gargoyle humors and glees, until finally Skeleton Tom skidded off the banister on the topmost floor to tumble and knock white candy skulls like 10 pins in a dire game among the shadows of crouched women by mounds, with miniature skeleton brass bands playing mosquito tunes with Mound Shroud. Far above, still on the roof, he yelled down, "Well, boys, do you see? It's all one, yes?"
Yes?
Someone murmured. "Always the same but different, eh? Every age, every time. Day was always over, night was always coming. And aren't you always afraid, ape man there? Or you, mummy, that the sun will never rise again?" "Yes," more of them whispered, and they looked up through the levels of the great house and saw every age, every story, and all the men in history staring round about as the sun rose and set. Ape men trembled, Egyptians cried laments, Greeks and Romans paraded their dead. Summer fell dead, winter put it in the grave, a billion voices wept. The wind of time shook the vast house. The windows rattled and broke like men's eyes into crystal tears. Then, with cries of delight, 10,000 times a million men welcomed back summer bright suns, which rose to burn each window with fire. "Do you see, lads? Think! People vanished forever. They died, oh Lord, they died, but came back in dreams. Those dreams were called ghosts and frightened men in every age." The billion voices from attics and basements cried. Shadows climbed walls like old films rerun in ancient theaters. Puffs of smoke lingered at doors with sad eyes and gibbering mouths. Night and day, summer and winter, boys, seed time and harvest, life and death. That's what Halloween is, all rolled up in one. Noon and midnight, being born, boys, rolling over, playing dead like dogs, lads, and getting up again, barking, racing through thousands of years of death each day and each night. Halloween, boys, every night, every single night, dark and fearful, until at last you made it and hid in cities and towns and had some rest and could get your breath. And you began to live longer and have more time and space out the deaths and put away fear, and at last have only special days in each year when you thought of night and dawn and spring and autumn and being born and being dead. And it all adds up. 4,000 years ago, 100 years ago, this year, one place or another, but the celebration's all the same. The Feast of Samhain, the time of the dead ones, All Souls, All Saints, the Day of the Dead, El Día de los Muertos, All Hallows, Halloween. The boys sent their frail voices up through the levels of time, from all the countries and all the ages, naming the holidays which were the same. Good, lads, good! Far off, the town clock struck 11:15. Almost midnight, boys. Halloween's almost over.
But,
cried Tom,
what about Pipkin? We followed him through history, burying him, digging him up, walking him in parades, crying him in wakes. Is or isn't he alive?
Yeah, said everyone.
Did we save him?
Did you indeed? Mound Shroud stared. They stared with him, across the ravine to a building where lights were going out. That's his hospital, boys. But check his house. The final knock of the night. The last grand trick or treat. Go ask for final answers. Mr. Marley, see them out. The front door flew wide. Bang! The Marley knocker on the door gaped its bandaged jaw and whistled them farewell as the boys slid down the banisters and raced for the door. They were stopped by a final shout from Mound Shroud. Boys! Well, which was it? Tonight with me, trick or treat? The boys took a vast breath, held it, burst it out.
Gosh, Mr. Moundshroud, both!
Rap went the Marley knocker, slam went the door, and the boys were gone running down through the ravine and up along the street, gasping hot gusts of air, their masks falling to be trampled until at last they lay stopped on Pipkin's sidewalk and looked at the far hospital and back at Pipkin's front door.
You go, Tom. You.
Said Ralph. And Tom slowly edged up to the house and put his foot on the front step, and then the second step, and approached the door, afraid to knock, afraid to find the final answer about dear old Pipkin. Pipkin dead? Pipkin in a last funeral? Pipkin gone forever? No! He tapped at the door. The boys waited on the sidewalk. The door opened. Tom went in. There was a long moment of the boys on the sidewalk standing cold and letting the wind freeze their most awful thoughts.
Well?
They yelled silently in at the house, the shut doors, the dark windows.
Well, what?
And then, at last, the door opened again, and Tom came out and stood on the porch, not knowing where he was. Then Tom looked up and saw his friends waiting for him 1,000,000 miles off. Tom leaped off the porch, yelling.
Oh gosh, oh gosh, oh gosh!
He ran along the sidewalk, shrieking.
He's okay! He's all right, he's okay! Pipkin's in the hospital! Took his appendix out at 9 tonight! Got it just in time. Doctor says he's great. Pipkin? Hospital? Great?
The air jumped out as if each had been punched in the stomach. The air went in and out again in a great rave, a yell, a ragged shout of triumph.
Pipkin, oh Pipkin, Pip!
And the boys stood on Pipkin's lawn and the sidewalk in front of Pipkin's porch and house and looked with numb curiosity at each other as their smiles spread and their eyes watered and they yelled and the happy tears ran down their cheeks.
Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy,
Tom said, exhausted and weeping with happiness.
You can say that again?
Said someone, and they all said it again. They all stood there and had a fine, happy cry. And since the whole night was turning soupy with tears, Tom looked around and revved him up.
Look at Pipkin's house. Don't it look awful? Tell you what we do.
And they ran and each came back carrying a lit pumpkin and lined them up on Pipkin's porch rail, where they smiled outrageous smiles to wait for Pipkin to come home. And they stood on the lawn. And they stood on the lawn and looked at the lovely sight of all those smiles, their costumes tattered upon their arms and shoulders and legs, and the grease paint dripped and running down their faces, and a great wondrous happy tiredness gathering in their eyelids and arms and feet, but not wanting to go yet. And the town clock struck midnight, and gunning again to a full count of 12, and Halloween was over. And all about the town, doors were slamming, lights going out. The boys began to drift, saying night, and again night, and some good night, but most night. Yes, night. And the lawn was empty, but Pipkin's porch was full of candle illumination, and warmth and baked pumpkin smell, and ghost and mummy and skeleton and witch and all the rest were back at their own homes, on their porches. And each turned to look at the town and remember this special night they would never, in all their lives, ever forget. And they looked across the town at one another's porches, but especially on and over across the ravine to that great house, where at the very top, Moundshroud stood on his spiked, railinged roof. The boys waved, each from his own porch. The boys waved, each from his own porch. The smoke curling out of high Moundshroud Gothic chimney fluttered, motioned, waved back, and still more doors were slamming to lock all around town. And with each slam, one more pumpkin, and then another, and another, and another on the huge Halloween tree snuffed out. By the dozens, by the hundreds, by the thousands, doors banged, pumpkins went blind, snuffed candles smoked delicious smokes. The witch hesitated, went in, shut the door. The witch-faced pumpkin on the tree went dark. The mummy stepped into his house and shut his door. A pumpkin with the face of a mummy extinguished its light. And finally, the last boy in all the town remaining alone on his veranda, Tom Skeleton, and his skull and bones hating to go in, wanting to wring the last dear drop of his favorite holiday in all the year, sent his thoughts on the night air towards the strange house beyond the ravine.
Mr. Moundshroud, who are you?
And Mr. Moundshroud, way up there on the roof, sent his thoughts back. I think you know, boy. I think you know.
Will we meet again, Mr. Moundshroud?
Many years from now, yes. I'll come for you. And a last thought from Tom.
Oh, Mr. Moundshroud, will we ever stop being afraid of nights and death?
And the thought returned. When you reach the stars, boy, yes, and live there forever, all the fears will go, and death himself will die. Tom listened, heard, and waved quietly. Mr. Moundshroud, far off, lifted his hand. Click. Tom's front door went shut. His pumpkin, like a skull on the vast tree, sneezed and went dark. The wind stirred the great Halloween tree, which was now empty of all light, save one pumpkin at the very top. A pumpkin with Mr. Moundshroud's eyes and face. At the top of the house, Mr. Moundshroud leaned out, took a breath, blew. His candle in his pumpkin head on the tree fluttered, died. Miraculously, smoke curled out of his own mouth, his nose, his ears, his eyes, as if his soul had been extinguished within his lungs at the very moment the sweet pumpkin gave up its incensed ghost. He sank down into his house. The roof trapdoor closed. The wind came by. It rocked all the dark smoking pumpkins on the vast and beautiful Halloween tree. The wind seized 1,000 dark leaves and blew them away up over the sky and down over the earth toward the sun that must surely rise. Like the town, the tree turned off its embered smiles and slept. At 2 in the morning, the wind came back for more leaves.